C 441 to 118a small. Sacrifice, _2. _. Let's get back to the matter at hand. You don't have to worry so much. You were able to carve out a domain in the abyss because it lacks wisdom. Now, its children are the same. Just as they had thought before, aside from Moya, these first-generation demon gods did indeed possess great power. However, they also inherited the chaotic traits of the abyss. Therefore, their reasoning is very weak, at least by human standards. At most, they have a little more ability to think than the devourers roaming the spirit realm, who can distinguish friend from foe and assess the weak and the strong. Well, let's hope everything goes as usual. Nodding his head, the Lord of the Nine Hells didn't dwell on it any longer. He just watched the approaching demon gods outside the world and finally confirmed. We will win, right? Of course, but in the end, it all depends on how you define victory. Standing up, Laine responded with a smile. Then, in the next moment, the reflection of his consciousness began to fade slowly. His incarnated thoughts returned to coil around the essence in the courtyard, and those two suns flickered as well. At least, judging by how she can't get me out of her head, she truly loathes me to the bone. So, I might as well take a bit of a loss, make a little sacrifice, don't you think? Laine's voice grew fainter as his consciousness returned, and the courtyard also quivered slightly. A colossal being started to move its stiff body, and watching all this, Asmodeus's cheeks twitched a little. Sacrifice. Yes, but no matter how you look at it, it seems the sacrifice is not coming from the other side. But let it be. Shaking his head, the figure of the Lord of the Nine Hells disappeared as well. As long as they could win, no matter how, after all, this was already the perfect solution. The abyss was not something they could defeat. Moya, even more so with his immortal nature, they were not enemies they could truly resolve. Thus, from the beginning of this war, his goal had never been a choice. The first layer of hell, tumultuous void tunnel. On the dim land, the sound of air tearing and trembling was incessant. A deep blue storm swept across the sky, then collided with a burst of firelight, illuminating a stretch of the sky. This particular scene didn't happen just once, but many times over. It wasn't the result of some force, but rather a characteristic of this layer of the realm itself, caused by modifications to its underlying rules. Ever since the Titan deity became its master, the god of meteorology infused the power of his deity days into this realm. In making it stronger, he also inevitably altered its foundational laws. From that day forth, storms ravaged the mountains and plains, their clamorous noise never ceasing. The environment of the entire realm slowly shifted in a certain direction, and in recent millennia, it even underwent further changes. The abyss absorbed fire and frost mist, and thus spawned demon gods with corresponding powers, along with realms filled with lava and cold streams. Of course, hell also gained its portion. To better resist the upcoming war, Asmodeus generously infused his share of the profits into the first realm layer. Hence, Crius's power surged, and firelight and frost flickered within the tumultuous void tunnel. So, although this world had no sun, it was never short of light. Flames spontaneously born from the void lit up the entire world, extinguished by storms or dancing with it. From a higher vantage point, countless points of light could be seen spinning and rising, giving warmth and light to this dim realm. Of course, with the birth of flame and cold stream, the storms became more fierce. The collision of cold and heat made the currents more unpredictable, rendering this world a place where only life beneath the ground could persist. Layers of tunnels and cavities were thus excavated, emitting sharp cries under the fierce winds on the surface, one of the reasons behind the name, tumultuous void tunnel. But that was during normal times. Currently, the first layer of hell was devoid of life. Not long ago, the devils here had orderly evacuated to the upper worlds under the command of their lord. Clearly, the clash between Tartarus and the Nine Hells was not something in which they could partake. This time, they didn't even qualify as spectators. Thus, the boundless realm stood empty, save for at the highest point, where Crius held a great sword, and gazed solemnly at his world. This place was about to become a battlefield, and he was the only warrior. It's always a fight against overwhelming odds. I wonder when he'll change this situation. He didn't voice it aloud, but Crius couldn't help feeling speechless. Whether above ground or below, he never seemed to experience the feeling of having strength in numbers. Fortunately, his power had grown stronger than in the past. Although at the beginning of his rebirth, this Titan deity had once lost the strength of his divine power, only maintaining the old view through the support of the realm. But after Hell's tens of thousands of years absorbing the power of the abyss, he had arduously returned to his original domain. Even now, as a being with the traits of a territorial god standing in the tumultuous void tunnel, Crius felt far superior to his past. The entire realm was one with him, and here, he felt he could face more than one peer. C 442 to 118a small. Sacrifice, _3. The only unfortunate part was that Crius suddenly realized that not only was each of his future enemies no weaker than he was now, but there were also 6 of them. As for his teammates, Crius glanced at Mephisto next to him. No matter how he looked at him, the other party didn't seem like someone who could fight well. Why are you the only one here? Where's the god you brought into hell, and the other guy, the one? Hypnos. Where did he go? Frowning, Crius was somewhat dissatisfied. Although they hadn't interacted much, he had to admit that the divine power of the god of sleep was indeed very powerful, even stronger than his. According to Hypnos, this was after he had lost the domain of sleep. Otherwise, he would have been almost at the pinnacle of the true god's realm. This revelation somewhat shocked Crius, for Hypnos had been virtually unknown in the mortal realm. But after thinking about it, he found it not so surprising. After all, such was the world of chaos, where death was ridiculously weak, but sleep had taken its place because, in this world, the most dreadful fate for a god was not death but eternal slumber. Therefore, it was only natural that the authority of the god of sleep was strong. Of course, perhaps it was this very strength that led to his overconfident rebellion. Regardless of the reason, it didn't concern Crius. He was just dissatisfied now because it seemed the other party had no intention of cooperating. He doesn't think hiding in his own little world will be of any use, does he? Crius snorted coldly, gripping his sword hilt, or does he think that the Lord of the Nine Hells won't settle accounts for his desertion? Before coming here, Asmodeus had clearly told him that the Lord of the third layer of Hell would help him restrain at least 2 demon gods. But now, he had no idea where the man was. Don't worry, Crius, he must have already arrived. As long as he wants to stay in Hell, he cannot defy the unanimous command of the 2 rulers. From beside him, Mephisto in midair was not in a hurry. As for where, the greatest use of his authority is not direct combat. However, I believe he will put in the effort. Unlike Crius, who was tense, Mephisto was actually enjoying the unique scenery of the noisy empty tunnel. Behind this distinctive environment lay the visible power of the lord of this layer, something he did not yet possess. Even though he had suddenly become a great lord of Hell, and even temporarily granted jurisdiction over the second layer of Hell due to the war, one problem still lay before him. Unlike his partner Crius, who might be considered bringing capital into the partnership, Mephisto was purely a high-level employee. Everything he possessed was because he could still create value for the Lord of the Nine Hells. But no value is permanent, and the longest-lasting value is to transform oneself into that value itself, like Crius and his meteorological origin. Indeed, disaster is the ladder to ascend. The destruction of humanity brought me to where I am today, and the invasion of the abyss is for a better tomorrow for us. With a pensive look, Mephisto smiled and said, so, looking on the bright side, perhaps after today, the noisy empty tunnel will grow stronger fed by the nourishment of demon gods' flesh and blood. Only if you are still alive tomorrow, human, Crius responded coldly. And I hope you remember, remnant of the Silver Age, I am immortal, but you are not. Leaving behind a cold laugh, wrapped in a hurricane, Crius leapt into the air. Behind him, Mephisto watched his retreating figure with an unchanged smile. He knew that as an innate deity, Crius never really looked up to him. Or rather, almost all gods disliked seeing mortals gradually become their equals, which was quite normal. But as common as it might be, there are plenty of normal things in this world. Like now, the key to determining the outcome of the war was never in the hands of Crius. Silver humanity. You are right, Mephisto said. Retrieving a silver mirror from the void, looking at the divine artifact granted temporarily to him, Mephisto continued to wait. Until at one moment, a thunderous roar came from the edge of space, shaking the whole world. Boom. Gazing up slightly, Mephisto knew that the gates of hell had been opened. C 443 to 119, whittling away. Thud, thud, thud. In the chaotic temporal space, there hadn't been any so-called portals, but when the forces of 2 worlds collided, it seemed as if it became visible along with them. Both originated from the same source and were mutually opposing and repelling, yet behind that repulsion was a mutual attraction. So, when Hell's gate was in front of her, Moya didn't hesitate to charge at it. Thud. The dull impact sound brought with it a spray of blood, but the slight pain instead aroused a certain ferocity in Moya. It was hard to say if she was influenced by the chaotic power of the abyss, but she didn't seem to be an overly intelligent deity to begin with. From the moment she realized her current situation, the mother of demons developed an insatiable desire for destruction. She wanted to destroy something, whether it was someone else or herself. Clang. Crack. She couldn't remember how many times she had collided, until at a certain moment, Moya felt as if she had broken through something, passing through some barrier, and arrived somewhere else. The power of the nine hells began to suppress her, but the world that was fully resisting the abyss didn't have much power to spare. It was more of a reminder to Moya that she had entered. So, shaking her body a bit, the mother of demons regained some sanity. She began to observe her surroundings with the tiny pupils hidden beneath her indescribable form and sensed the breath of the entire hell. Looking down from the sky, within a darkened world, countless points of light flickered into and out of existence, adding a spectacular color to this realm. The shrieking sounds, either sharp or heavy, incessantly echoed, as if an incompetent orchestra was playing, making Moya somewhat bothered. But that wasn't the most critical issue. The mother of demons' gaze moved to a deeper layer of temporal space. As the only being currently qualified to bear a portion of Abyss's power, Moya temporarily received a bit of extra care from it. Although the conditions for using this care were stringent and limited because she couldn't become the king of the Abyss, and it only worked when facing the enemies of Tartarus, it still allowed her to detect the distribution of powers within Hell. Besides the world itself that was fighting against Tartarus, only the middle position had the strength to rival hers at this moment. As for other places, only a few were somewhat stronger beings. But it didn't matter, because the Abyss had more numbers. Thus, even with no great battle wisdom, Moya quickly determined the best course of action. She would entangle the threatening being, and then the other demon gods would destroy this world. Of course, all this was predicated on the assumption that this world could withstand the struggle between her and that foreign existence. Without further hesitation, the mother of demons stretched out her body, emitting a long and piercing cry. Ah! The sound reverberated through the noisy space, also reaching beyond this realm, as Moya was calling the demon gods born along with her. These beings lacking in reason could not communicate normally, but fortunately, Moya didn't need to waste words with them. Her voice carried but one consciousness, to destroy everything before her. Boom. The next moment, without waiting for their response, Moya once again collided with her full body, charging into the depths of the world. The first layer of the world was pierced without resistance, but in the crevices of the nine realms, a black shadow suddenly flashed by. Without time to react, Moya was once again cast into the ground of the noisy space tunnel. The force continued, sending her through the Earth's layers until she fell out of the nine hells and struck against the body of an eight-armed, three-headed titan. Flesh tore and then healed, and with a mere shake of her body, Moya stood up again. At the end of her gaze, she saw the one who had attacked her. Rising from nothingness, crawling through space-time, a massive snake head protruded from the interdimensional plane. Its blood-red eyes were fixed on the demons, not hiding the murderous intent within. However, at this sight, Moya let out a sharp laugh, showing no anger from the attack. Good. Very good. Since you don't want to fight me inside, then come outside. Although regardless of where, the outcome awaiting you will be no different. Fighting here actually aided the display of her powers more. As for the potential damage to some layers of the abyss, neither Moya nor Tartarus really cared too much. In comparison, the significances of a few demon gods were somewhat greater. They at least indeed represented some aspect of the abyss's authority. If something happened to them, that would be a significant issue. So without any fancy moves and still lacking any knowledge of other tactics, she charged at her opponent in the same primitive way as before. It might look somewhat foolish, but it was the most effective method. She didn't need to do anything else. From now on, Moya just had to ensure that her opponent was too overwhelmed to care about anything else. At the junction connecting the abyss and hell, at the entrance to the first layer of hell. Unlike the turbulence outside, this place still seemed somewhat calm. After all, even the demon gods passing through here didn't stay long, instead following an indistinct call toward the depths of the world. So now, only one guy was left here, who intended to lay low but unexpectedly stumbled upon a ticking bomb. C 444-119, whittling away _2. Hiss, truly, beyond my comprehension. The slight tremble of his body, the gray wings on his back all drooped. Hypnos, hidden at the entrance of the realm, seemed to have been struck by some powerful impact and for a moment was unable to react. Therefore, he almost passively watched the first 4 demon gods birthed by the mother of demons enter the bustling void tunnel before him, without managing to make any response. Really bad luck. His mouth twitched slightly, unsure how to comprehend the situation. Actually, if he had run into an opponent he couldn't defeat, he might have understood that much, but the experience he had just endured was truly hard to evaluate. After all, strictly speaking, he had actually done nothing just now but looked, out of curiosity, at the gigantic life form that had burst into the 9 hells. And now, he deeply regretted it. The flash of a giant creature, the intense mental shock, it wasn't just some indescribable phenomenon on the surface, but more a conceptual definition. Having appeared in the dreams of the gods many times, Hypnos had seen the figure of the goddess of beauty on Mount Olympus, and indeed, Aphrodite was as her godhood dictated. No matter who you were, no matter your gender, whether you liked her or not, you would be captivated by her beauty under the influence of her inherent authority. You could dislike her character, question her abilities, but you must admit, she was someone whose presence was pleasing to the eye, a stark contrast to Moya. At that moment, Hypnos was quite certain that the mother of demons was most likely granted an opposite power by the abyss, and it was probably enhanced. Because on her, there was also the natural repulsion of order against chaos. In any case, under various influences, her figure seemed to have some mystical effect. Although it didn't cause any direct damage, it was a bit more terrifying than if it had. With just a moment's gaze, the god of sleep felt he would not forget her for 10,000 years to come. He had no doubt that if this disgusting creature didn't think of some way to conceal itself in the future, no one would want to communicate with her. At this time, Hypnos didn't know that he wasn't the first victim. The demon god of 1,000 eyes and thoughts had seen her the moment it was born and promptly destroyed its own eyes. But even when a new pair grew back, it was still meaningless. The impact on the spirit, naturally, was not affected by the physical body, so its instinctual reaction was just futile. Here it comes. After a moment, the god of sleep finally shifted his attention back to serious matters. He had already let 4 through. If there were issues with the last 2 as well, that would be a bit inexcusable. Regardless, at this point, he was a contracted worker, relying on the hospitality of others, so Hypnos forced himself to be spirited. Under his gaze, after a short while, the void trembled again, and a dark blue mist seeped from it. Just like at the moment of its birth, the mist concealed the newcomer's form, hiding the true appearance of the demon god and making it difficult for others to pinpoint its exact location. And the seemingly beautiful mist actually contained an extremely horrifying toxicity, enough to turn any who approached into withered bones. This was a power not found in the chaos world. It originated from the source of frost power, a primeval fountain from a certain realm. The original fountain, known alongside the Well of Erd and Mimir's Well, didn't have many effects. Its terrifying toxicity was its most notable feature. And now, it seemed that this trait was partly inherited by the demon god that carried its power, becoming the best barrier surrounding it. But it doesn't matter. I never planned on getting close to you. Something with not much wisdom is not hard to deal with at all. He reached out and a dark purple flute fell into his hand. This divine artifact that was born with him had not abandoned him as he fell into hell. Hypnos brought it to his lips, and a melodious tune immediately filled the world, despite the howling hurricane. The violent winds did not interfere with its effects, for the music of the god of sleep was not meant for ears to listen to. His power traveled unhindered along with the melody into the mist, and at the same time, gray feathers fell from his wings, drifting across the void towards the other side. Visible to the naked eye, the moving blue mist slowly came to a halt, though the fog around it grew even denser. It seemed to possess some sort of instinct, which allowed it to protect itself during sleep, but even so, Hypnos had no intention of doing any harm to it. His power was not dominant in direct combat. Despite having knocked down the opponent with one move just now, if a real fight ensued, even with the upper hand, the outcome was uncertain. Compared to the native lifeforms transformed by hell, Hypnos was not keen on the power of abyssal demon lords. Rather than pondering whether he could solve the problem once and for all, it was more meaningful to control one more of them. Crius, right. Since you're undead anyway, 2 more hits it is then. That's how it was on the ground, and it seems you've always played the role of a punching bag, even among the stars. Watching the void surge again, a shadow slinked out, and Hypnos silently thought to himself. He had seen that scene in a few dreams of the gods of stars, the meteorological titan beaten mercilessly by the ancient god of sun, that was a nightmare for many gods of stars. After all, they still remembered how many of their kind perished during that time. Their survival to this day was purely luck. Therefore, it was conceivable that in this respect, Crius was very experienced. Shadow. There's no difference. Once again blowing his flute with practiced ease, Hypnos immobilized the last demon god and relaxed, even taking the time to observe this unique individual. It was not just the outward difference that struck the god of sleep, he had even sensed that this one had more reasoning than the previous few. Of course, that was meaningless. Whether slightly smarter or dumber, neither affected being influenced by his power. And once they fell into deep sleep, waking up would not be easy. Lucky one. After observing for a while, Hypnos no longer dwelled on it. Even after falling into hell, the god of sleep still bore the appearance of a youth, which inevitably gave a sense of a dark fairy tale amidst such a setting. Turning around, he looked deeper into the realm, where battles were also about to erupt within the noisy spatial tunnels. The invading demon gods were brazenly attempting to collapse this world, and its masters clearly could not tolerate such behavior. Although their power was insufficient to destroy the fabric of space-time that carried the world itself, their goal was not for such. Once they exterminated the life on this plane and occupied its center, then spread their own influence across the sky and the ground. This place would gradually bear the mark of the abyss. When this mark was completed, Tartarus would then be able to use it as an anchor to send its force accurately here, rather than playing a game of hide and seek with the 9 hells across the layers of space-time. Slowly eroding, then deciding the outcome when the big picture was almost set, this was the process of the struggle between hell and the abyss. Just as chaos had worn down the resistance of Hemanu world over a long period, collisions between worlds were not to be solved overnight. Mutual devouring, truly primordial and aesthetically pleasing. Sitting amidst the void, his feathers continuously falling and regrowing, Hypnos commented lightly. Although he was there in person, the innate evil god could hardly be said to have any empathy. So now, he was just fulfilling his most basic task, then waiting here, watching as this wind-filled world slowly burned. C 445-120, The Curse. To say that Hypnos watched the world burn is not a poetic description but an actual depiction of the first layer of hell. Although the noisy wind tunnels that crisscross through rocks and stones had nothing that could serve as fuel, the transcendent world does not adhere to the laws of physics. At this moment, with the invasion of the demon gods, the whole world erupted in turbulence. It was an attraction and opposition between origins, a resonance from the same power that emanated from Muspelheim, the country of flames. Therefore, the relevant laws of the realm were excited, causing a red hue to suffuse the relentless hurricane. Crackle. The great sword scraped against the phosphorus armor with a grating sound, but it was quite clear that the attack failed to pierce through this innate defense. The fruitless strike was followed by no time for further action as Crius couldn't help but change his expression and immediately dissipated into formless mist, dispersing into the void around him. The next moment, a dark red shadow pierced through, turning the mist into nothingness as it passed. Its unstoppable momentum carried it to the land behind. Almost visibly to the naked eye, the ground and rocks at the impact site crumbled into the finest dust, then vanished without a trace with the wind. The mist coalesced, and feeling his divine body slightly weakened, Crius had no time to marvel at the power of the demon gods, as he again retreated. In the next instant, a bloated, segmented worm leapt from the ground, the human face on its top contorting into a greedy grin as it lunged toward the entity in the sky. Perhaps the body was too massive, perhaps it lacked profound combat wisdom, or maybe it was because of a disparity in authority, but under Crius's evasion, they should have passed each other by, if his opponent had nothing more to say. But reality holds no ifs. In the distance, although a crack was plainly visible on its translucent wings, the colossal moth still spread its wings wide, and with it, a myriad of eyes also opened. In an instant, a flood of chaotic emotions surged into Crius's heart, disregarding the barrier of time and space. Fear, panic, anger, envy, deceit. They combined in various proportions, contained in every eye of the demon god's countless gazes. When they opened simultaneously, they coalesced into millions of new emotions that together infiltrated Crius's heart, causing the once titan deity to stumble in his movements, his will falling into a state of chaos. Thus, in an instant, the leaping worm closed in on its target, its facial expressions on the body becoming even more sinister. At the moment of contact, the human face seemed to take a severe breath, and it could be seen that Crius's divine body instantly shriveled. Hiss! Back off! Sense of emptiness rose from the depths, awakening Crius, who was still being bombarded with emotions. Instinctively slashing with his sword, he easily tore a huge wound through the worm's body. But this was of little significance, as the opponent's body visibly recovered. Meanwhile, not only did a second ray of light infused with different powers come hurtling through the air, but a demon wreathed in flames also rushed toward him, wielding a chained sword. Damn! Cursing, Crius could only meet the advance with his sword. Although he was not a match, he wouldn't be completely defeated in a moment. After all, for an immortal primordial deity, unless one burned oneself like the ancient god of sun, or was tainted by a higher level of power, ordinary injuries were not fatal to a god and did not require much time to heal gradually. As long as the power hadn't run dry, even if attacked thousands of times, he could still fully recover. Swish. Avoiding the sharp edge of the sword, dodging the incoming rays of light, and barely boosting his spirits by self-inflicted harm, Crius raised his great sword, aiming for the head of the demon god. This place lacked the thick phosphorus armor, maybe it could actually inflict some damage. The best defense is offense, a lesson he learned from participating in numerous godly battles. As the sword fell, Crius allowed himself a small measure of bitter joy, finally able to wound the demon wrapped in the fires of destruction. However, no sooner had the thought formed when the ensuing scene made his eyes widen and his form retreat explosively. Perhaps sensing that it was about to be struck, the demon god didn't show fear but rather its eyes gleamed with intensified brutality and murderous intent. Engulfed in battle, its body was already ruled by instinct, so it bore down on the sword edge and charged forward. The body began to disintegrate, flesh and blood combusting, with the demon making no attempt to evade the enemy's attack but rolling into a ball, throwing itself onto the adversary, and then exploding beside Crius with a mighty blast in his horror-stricken gaze. Boom! The self-detonation of a demon god raised a sun in the dark and tumultuous tunnel, endless light and heat illuminating the vast land, and the tremendous roar and shaking shook the whole world. As the blast occurred, the tunnels and cavities mined under the land for millennia vanished into nothing, and beneath the explosion site, billions of tons of earth turned into lakes of magma, then vaporized the next moment. Even at the edges of the realm, Hypnos couldn't help but be alarmed by this power and increased the output of his energy to barely prevent the two demon gods from awakening from their slumber. In the center of the explosion, Crius, despite his best efforts to escape, was left with nothing but skeletal remnants and a few pieces of internal organs on his divine body. C 446 to 120 curse_2. They continued to proliferate, then were ignited by the flames that overflowed in the space, subjecting the once great Titan deity to tortures akin to 1,000 cuts and slices. He wanted to scream out his agony, but Crius found himself now unable to even make a sound. Facing the four demon gods alone, Crius had long known he was no match for them, so all he aimed to do was to buy enough time. That's why he chose to experience their powers one by one from the outset. The first opponent he chose was the demon god symbolizing the life and change of the abyss. However, just like its power, although the owner of the boisterous hollow easily tore through the flesh of the worms, his injuries were meaningless. This was quite normal. Aside from a few authorities, any existence when confronted with something tied to life, often found themselves at a loss. Thus, after only a brief encounter and having taken a few blows, Crius decisively shifted his target. Since the first was unsuitable for an offensive target, the second one he chose was the thousand-eyed demon god. Its aura was clearly weaker than the others, and this time the attack did have some effect. The body was fragile, its healing speed not so swift. With just one stroke, Crius left a scratch on its wing. But soon, Crius again switched his target. He realized in horror that the moment the eyes on its body were damaged, the demon god would burst forth with emotional turmoil many times stronger, rendering him stiff and unable to move. This was thanks to some flaw in its power, otherwise, it would have been more than just temporary stiffness. The chaotic gods were always lacking resistance to such powers. Had the thousand-eyed demon god possessed sufficient emotions, but lacked consciousness, Crius' fate would have been even worse. In this battle, he was already striving to conserve his strength through his authority and reason, and this kind of hard control attack was undoubtedly the last thing he wanted to encounter. So, after weighing his options, Crius firmly set his sights on the third demon god, that three-headed, eight-armed giant. During the previous clashes, he had been observing his surroundings and had thought he finally found an easy target, because Crius discovered that the three heads of the demon god seemed to have different thoughts, all equally chaotic. They often interfered with one another, acting in self-contradictory manners, at best projecting beams of light from the eyes on their foreheads that contained different powers to attack the enemy. However, the moment it was truly about to be injured, the three consciousnesses united rapidly and instinctively, beginning to fight the enemy recklessly, without regard for consequences. So after taking a few more losses, Crius once again changed his target and looked at the demon enveloped in flames. Regarding the three-headed giant, perhaps the threat would be smaller if left unattended. The last one, and the one Crius had least wanted to face before the battle, was the demon god whose appearance was closest to the demons of later ages. Not only did it have heavy phosphorus armor, but it also wielded a massive chain sword. That was a true divine artifact, far from being comparable to the lesser weapon in Crius' hands. And indeed, his apprehension was proven right, for he dared not even face the demon's sword edge, yet he couldn't breach the demon's phosphorus armor at all. However, compared to the other three, Crius still felt the one before him was somewhat more suitable for a main attack. At least he could exchange a few blows with it, and the demon god clearly lacked experience in wielding weapons. That was until the world-shaking explosion occurred, leaving him in his current state. Looking at the far-off demon god whose aura had fallen sharply but who remained ferocious and insane, Crius had no doubt that if he dared approach, the demon could gift him a self-destruct at any moment. Had this been a one-on-one fight, he would not have hesitated to confront such a move that killed 800 enemies at the cost of 3,000 selves, but now he had 4 enemies. Damn you, Mephisto, where the hell have you gone? He roared and then flew away in retreat. Although one of the enemies had entered a period of weakness post-ultimate ability, it didn't mean the others were affected. It seemed that a head-on battle was utterly meaningless, so within the first layer of hell, and with more severity than when he faced Hyperion, Crius could only dodge everywhere, as new wounds accumulated upon his body. He didn't know what the turning point would be, but clearly, if he didn't want the demon gods to freely contaminate his domain, leaving behind the deep-seated powers of the abyss difficult to eradicate even after the battle, he had to hold on a little longer. And for a being of a deity's caliber, this, little longer, was not going to be a short span of time. Mortal realm, the palace of King Eryxis. Snow filled the skies. At this moment in the mortal realm, no one knew what demons and devils were, not even the existence of Tartarus existed except in certain legends. The people were engrossed in the joy of the harvest, admiring the snowy landscape they had never seen before. This had just appeared this year, also signifying that the concept of winter had further solidified. Perhaps it was because of Demeter's prior anger, or perhaps the time had truly come. Either way, the weather was changing again. And during this time, Demophan had been buried by the royal couple on a small mountain away from the city. The king did not dare bury him near the goddess, so this was his only choice. C 447-120, the curse _3. After this, Demophan's eldest brother, Tripdolemos, was once again sent to the abode of the goddess by Clitus. However, this time, when they arrived, no one dared to lift their heads and look directly at Demeter. They all gazed at the ground, displaying their humility to the deity walking among them in the mortal realm. That day, the king thought he would once again receive news of his eldest son's death, and Tripdolemos shared this belief. Yet, when faced with the choice given by his father, he still chose to come. Unexpectedly, Demeter did not go back on her word. She kept her promise and granted the young child the glory closest to that of a god. At this place where the former king had once resided, the goddess imparted to Tripdolemos the secrets of agriculture, which were both the accumulation and summary of the past generations of humans, as well as the processes deduced from results by Demeter herself. This knowledge included not only the growth of grains and the methods of cultivation, but even spanned the changing of celestial patterns and geology, breeding and selection of grain varieties, and the laws of climate among other crystallizations of wisdom. This knowledge was complex and profound, and much of it was understood in its effects but not in its causes. Yet the vague explanations by the goddess were inevitably misinterpreted by mortals. They believed it was simply because they could not comprehend the wisdom of the gods, and as they gradually unraveled the mysteries behind it, their praise for the greatness of the gods grew even more fervent. Furthermore, Demeter also bestowed upon Tripdolemos the privilege to wield sacred power, and after he mastered all knowledge, she appointed him as her chief shepherd in the mortal realm. Humans herd cattle and sheep to obtain meat and milk, while deities herd humans to garner faith and pleasure. Therefore, the existence closest to the gods among humans is naturally the chief of those shepherds who herd on behalf of the gods. From that day forth, Eleusis, situated on the edge of the human lands, became the first kingdom in the mortal realm to worship Demeter exclusively. People built temples to honor the goddess in various places, regarding her as the principal god of harvest and agriculture, because it was also from that day on that, with the help of the divine arts of the priesthood led by Tripdolemos, Eleusis regained its abundant harvest, allowing the nation to be rejuvenated. The goddess thus gained immense reputation among mortals, and because of Tripdolemos's unique status, there were no internal conflicts within the kingdom. He was both the future king and the earthly proxy of the goddess, so just like Silver Moon City, the political and religious elements united into one. Without any conflicts of interest and with the deity in close proximity, it naturally returned to the fast track of development. Everyone was immersed in joy, and even the king put aside his resentment while he reminisced about his youngest child. After all, things were good now, and rather than holding a grudge against an invincible enemy for a lifetime, it was better to temporarily let go. It was a reluctant decision, the wisdom of the weak seeking survival. In any case, the events of that night seemed to have passed just like that. No one in the palace spoke of it, and the common folk outside were even less likely to know what had happened. No one spoke of the prince who died young, as if he had never existed. The people simply sang praises of the goddess's greatness and enjoyed the long-awaited harvest. Only Metanira was not like this. That night, Demeter's aloof pronouncement still echoed in the queen's dreams, and the manner of her young son's death was vivid in her mind. In Metanira's heart, there was no letting go, only a mortal's curse upon a deity. Unfortunately, in this world, a curse without power is nothing at all. C 448-121 Poseidon, who was accidentally targeted, ecstatic. In the palace of Eryxis, where the queen resided. In the cold winter, snowflakes drifted down, landing on the rooftop and the ground. The chilly wind outside and the burning fire inside created a convection, stirring up breezes. Through the window, Metanira could see the guards outside. They were the elite warriors of the kingdom, second-order fighters who not only possessed extraordinary strength, immune to heat and cold, but could also temporarily enhance themselves with the energy within their bodies. They could march 100 miles wearing heavy armor or triumph over common beasts with their bare hands. In this era, they were almost considered reserves for the high echelons of Eryxis, and after centuries of development, this high echelon might even be replaced by aristocrats. Thus, having them as guards was originally a symbol of status, but the queen knew that they were not there to protect her. On the contrary, they were there to protect the flourishing kingdom from being destroyed by her. And all this was because of Metanira's resentment towards the goddess of agriculture. Everyone forgot the existence of the little prince, or rather, many commoners were never aware of the full story, but the queen was not willing to forget. Everyone was grateful for the presence of the goddess, for she made natural disasters less fearsome, but the queen was equally unwilling to be thankful. Even when Metanira saw the citizens of Eryxis showing gratitude towards Demeter, she still tried to tell them the truth behind it. All she didn't expect understanding from the people, but at least they should remember that Demophon died because of it, and his name should not be forgotten in silence. And from that day on, the queen was taken back to the palace. Clearly, although Demeter herself had already cast aside the memory of that dead child and did not wish to recall that failed creation, others dared not let the stain of the goddess be spread. King Crius also gradually had some suspicions about the whole incident. The goddess certainly acted capriciously, treating mortals like ants, but if her ants did not interfere with her affairs, then Demeter actually wouldn't do much. This was the disdain of a deity for mortals, just as humans scorn livestock. Upon realizing this, King Crius's suppressed pain was not erased, but he inevitably let go of some worries. At least he understood that as long as he complied with the will of the goddess in all things, the same disaster would not befall his eldest son again. Under these circumstances, he naturally would not allow any accidents to happen, nor would he allow Metanira's speech to affect the deity's image in the eyes of the people and thereby shake the faith in the goddess. So even though he understood the queen's sorrow, he still coldly confined her to her own palace. He thought time would heal all wounds and that his attention to his eldest son and family would gradually make Metanira let go of her unrealistic notions. After all, the dead cannot be brought back, and the living must go on. However, clearly, Crius did not know that for some people, the status of the living could never overcome that of the dead. So on this day, as night fell, the queen sent away all the maids who came to care for her, or rather, to simply prevent her from committing an act of blasphemy. She covered the windows with a curtain and then took out a box of finely crafted incense. It was the result of 2 months of hard work by Metanira, made with special recipes. 4 parts frankincense, myrrh, and 2 parts styrax. 1 part cedar and ginger, paired with half a part orris, cardamom, cinnamon, juniper, iris flower, and bay laurel, plus 7 dried grapes, a few drops of nectar, honey, and lotus fragrance. Just for these ingredients alone, if she had not been the queen, she would have had no chance of gathering them all. With the ingredients in hand, she processed them according to different chronological rituals. She ground the herbs, let them sit sealed for 2 weeks, then mixed them with essential oils, nectar, grapes, and once more let them sit. After a month of waiting, she finally turned the finished product into incense sticks, stored in a small box. It is said that such incense could communicate with the deity, at least that's what the gods said. So now, Metanira took it out and carefully lit it. The flame flickered for a moment, and then a faint mist wafted around the room, dissipating into nothingness after extending a certain distance. It seemed to carry the queen's will to some unknowable place, bearing her certain intent. Minutes and seconds passed. The night grew increasingly deep. Until midnight, as the incense was about to burn out, the void in front of Metanira's expectant gaze finally trembled slightly. Soon, under the flickering candlelight, 2 figures that could be considered small appeared and solidified gradually. They looked like children of about 10 years old, but the queen's eyes held only caution and longing as she looked at them. It seems you have made your preparations, said the boy, taking the lead, followed closely by the girl. You must choose one of us. Looking at the mortal before them, Volos and Eros spoke dispassionately. Now, make your choice. This is your only chance in life to take revenge on a god. In the queen's bedchamber, the conversation continued. This was not their first meeting. In fact, soon after Metanira had been confined to the palace, she had already encountered these 2 childlike gods. C 449-121 Poseidon, who was accidentally targeted ecstatic_2. In a simple demonstration, 2 children no more than 10 years old released a golden arrow that made a resolute guard fall passionately in love with a rock, treating it as his sole companion. This terrifying spectacle not only sent chills down the queen's spine but also convinced her of the visitors' identities. In the simple belief system of the people of chaos, influencing a person's thoughts is far more terrifying than killing a person's body. With hardly any doubt, Metanira concluded that the newcomers were deities more powerful than Demeter. And through a brief conversation with them, the queen understood their intentions. They were willing to assist her in her revenge, to inflict retribution on the goddess of agriculture, or rather, helping her achieve her vengeance would serve their purposes, which is why they had come. A golden arrow could inspire irresistible love, a lead arrow could generate intolerable hatred. They laid the 2 arrows before the queen, allowing her to choose one and then decide on a target. Of course, the target had to be related to her quest for vengeance. I want to know, can you bring Demophan back to life? Amid the smoke rising from the incense, the queen asked with hope in her voice. Although she had long contemplated revenge against Demeter, she would rather resurrect her child if possible. That was far more meaningful than revenge. However, the 2 deities, looking like young teenagers, shook their heads together before replying one after the other. Although I would like to say, even if we could, we would not agree. Because we are not here to fulfill your wishes. But in fact, we indeed cannot do that. As if they were of one mind, their alternating words carried no sense of division. Watching the queen's gaze turn from hope to despair, Volos and Eros continued. Because his spirit has also perished. At least it has not returned to the spirit realm. Divine power can accomplish this. And nobody would call her to account for an individual case. Now, make your choice. This is your only chance. X2. The last phrase, their overlapping voices echoing in the room, carried a hint of reverberation. As hope died in the queen's heart, the flames of hatred burned even more fiercely. During her days of de facto captivity, Metanira also reflected on everything that transpired that night. Her child was killed, and perhaps her interruption was a factor, but the essence of the matter was the deity's haughty attitude. Demeter had never truly poured her emotions into Demophan, not much, if any. She had merely seen Demophan as her perfect creation and then, as a matter of course, sought to destroy this flawed creation. Therefore, the greatest punishment for such a being was to have her give birth to a truly shameful progeny that would bring her eternal disgrace. I choose the golden arrow, Prince Volos. Clenching her fist, the queen said each word deliberately. I want you to direct it at the ugliest existence among the gods, then let him conceive a possessive emotion for Demeter. I want them to give birth to an equally ugly child. There are no ugly true gods, Metanira. Even the most ordinary-looking true god is hard to describe as ugly. Unaware of the existence of Hephaestus, Volos carrying the golden arrow denied the queen's statement. Then I demand the god with the most bizarre tastes, the one with a cruel and unbearable disposition. Grinding her teeth, Metanira even glanced at Eros beside her. Or more precisely, at the lead arrow he carried. If you could shoot her with an arrow and make her genuinely detest that god. That is also impossible, you do not possess that ability. Eros dismissed it offhandedly, his expression somewhat disinterested. Our arrows draw strength from revenge and cannot simply be shot without cause. If you were a deity, the hatred from the killing of your child would indeed suffice to wield both arrows, and their effects would be extraordinary. But unfortunately, you are just a mortal. So no matter how great your hatred is, you can only make one effective, and its impact will not be permanent. Quote. Remaining silent, the queen finally calmed down a bit after being rebuffed repeatedly. She looked at the twins before her, and an inexplicable sense of grief and indignation surged within her. Again, just like how Demeter had once looked down on her as if she were nothing, these two deities who had come to assist her were essentially the same. They merely saw her as a tool. But perhaps she had long stopped caring about her own life, so watching them, Metanira couldn't help but remark sarcastically. So why did you bother appearing before me? Do the gods need assistance from mortals? Hey. With a disdainful laugh, Eros paid no attention to the queen's words. Trivial mortals, pointless emotions. Of course, they might mean something to her, but Eros had no interest in understanding. She drew a golden arrow from her twin brother's back and tossed it before the queen. The hatred in the other's heart didn't escape her perception, so she was sure that the queen would not give up no matter what. We will satisfy you. Drench the arrow with your blood, harboring a heart of vengeance. Once you have done this, we will carry out the latter part. What happens next is up to you. Hiss. The golden arrow pierced the queen's chest, but she seemed not to feel the pain. Blood gushing from her chest soaked the arrow, seemingly awakening the power contained within it. C 450 to 121 Poseidon, who was accidentally targeted, ecstatic _3. A strong hatred flashed in Metanira's eyes, not just toward Demeter, but against all the gods present. However, facing her, the twin deities of desire were merely shocked for a moment, then regarded the whole affair with indifference. Her readiness to use her own life to demonstrate her resolve, possibly also because her husband and son had knelt before their enemies, led her to relinquish hope in life. Yet the joy and sorrow of gods and mortals do not intersect. The twins found her actions laughable. What could she prove? Nothing at all. Her actions, aside from moving herself and saddening her loved ones for a moment, accomplished nothing. Bang. Remember what you promised me. Fallen to the ground, the queen's voice was intermittent, eventually fading into nothingness. When the room returned to silence, Volos stepped forward to pick up the golden arrow, then flicked off the excess blood. The twins saw it clearly. When Metanira's life departed, her soul left her body and entered the Underworld. She would follow the Styx River into the all-spirit realm, where her memories would be washed away, and then she would be reborn. This was precisely why the twins found the situation amusing. After all, even such fervent hatred had no significance in the face of the world's law. By the time she arrived at the river of oblivion before the well of reincarnation, those heartfelt memories would have long since been blown away by the wind. So about the candidate, what about Poseidon? Looking at Eros, who could have been either his sister or his brother, Volos offhandedly suggested. He had heard of this god before, and it was said that his tastes were a bit different from regular gods. The spirit realm had already received many souls of his demigod offspring. And the forms of those demigods were, in a word, very unique. That undoubtedly fit Metanira's specifications well, so Volos thought of him first. I have no objections, considering she chose your arrow. But then again, do you really plan on fulfilling her wish? Eros responded somewhat indifferently, yet with a hint of curiosity. Before coming here, that fellow who seemed to be their father god, or perhaps not, had told them of the events here and that they could use this as a pretext to get something from Demeter, but he seemed to imply, threaten, not to actually take action. Therefore, even though the queen performed much, exhibiting her intense emotions, in fact, from the beginning, the twins had not intended to honor the agreement. They just needed an arrow that could deter Demeter. As for mortal hatred, it mattered little whether it was avenged or not. After all, their need for revenge was merely a consequence of the law's influence at the time of their conception. As the twins shaped directly from the Heavenly Father's blood followed a different trajectory than their original destiny, they were influenced not just by love and beauty but also had a tight connection to the power of the three Furies. But in the end, they were not Furies themselves, so they had no strong attachment to avenging others' grievances. As for breaking their word, regrettably, the newly born twins also had no concept of being as good as their word. Although you say that, Eros, can't we still shoot him? Pocketing the now cleaner golden arrow, feeling the power awaken with the stimulus of the hatred, Volos casually questioned. It was just a suggestion. Suggesting that we could threaten her, but letting her witness the power first won't hurt, right? Besides, the goddess of agriculture doesn't know I only have one golden arrow. Across from him, after a moment of silence, Eros pondered briefly, then nodded decisively. You're right, it should be possible. Yes, that seems to be the idea. It sounded interesting, so why refuse? Though they were the twin deities of desire, the recently born divinities had not yet witnessed what truly fervent love looked like, and seeing it now wouldn't be a bad thing. As for what would happen between Poseidon and Demeter, Eros did not care in the slightest. Perhaps it was the residual influence of their primordial god's nature, although their power was nearly gone, a certain mentality remained. Just as gods view mortals, in the eyes of Eros, there was no difference between Demeter and Poseidon. Even if they possessed great power, at best it was like the difference between how humans view cattle, sheep, and lions, tigers. They were not of the same kind, and the opinions of different kinds could naturally be disregarded. Then let's be on our way. With a change in demeanor, even beginning to urge onward, with a flicker in the void, the silhouettes of the twins vanished from the room. The palace of the queen returned to quietude, with only a faint scent of blood slowly spreading. And from beginning to end, they had not given the body of the queen on the ground another glance. In the southern sea, the palace of the sea emperor. Embracing a merperson beside him, the descendant whose generation he did not know, Poseidon took a sip of nectar in his cup, watching the lively dance and song before him. He was in a good mood, as the losses from the previous deluge had finally been recouped, the humans on the islands were developing well, and aside from still being unable to beat the god of the ocean, there didn't seem to be anything dissatisfying him. Although he couldn't match Zeus, the divine king, Poseidon felt his life was much better than Hades's, and gradually, the sea emperor began indulging in pleasure-seeking. There were still many goals, but they could be delayed for another day. Being happy for a day or two wouldn't hurt, so life continued in this way for a long time. Even when a premonition, whether a warning or not, flashed through his mind, he remained blissfully unaware. C 451 to 122 Wandering Mind. In the present world, the southern seas. It didn't take much time for Volos and Eros to cross the great distances. They traveled through the deep spirit realm, and within a few flashes, they shifted from the spirit realm to a position above the Sea Emperor's palace. The fragrant sea, the nearly non-existent guards, the faintly visible luxurious divine palace, that was all there was to it. Clearly, the Sea Emperor didn't believe anyone could silently approach him through the sea. Of course, he wasn't actually wrong about that. Just like now, even the black and white ocean, reflected by the first layer of the spirit realm, looked different near Poseidon's domain, even containing some colors within it. Like Olympus, the places where deities dwell year-round naturally bear the influence of their powers. This influence over the years seeped into another temporal dimension, instinctively keeping away the life of the spirit realm and making it very difficult for others to directly infiltrate the side of the Sea Emperor. If it were the little god of love from the original myths, faced with such a situation, he might have been helpless. He couldn't hit a deity residing in his own palace. After all, his golden arrow may have had unique power, but he himself was not an unparalleled archer. However, facing the same problem, Volos and Eros were not worried. While Uranus's divine blood gave their bow and arrow the restraint of revenge, it also endowed it with the ability to lock on to a target. Coupled with the Gingnur, inherited from the divine lance, everything became much simpler. Thump. Drawing the bow and positioning the arrow, with the sound of the bowstring vibrating, the golden arrow in Volos' hand shot forth. Even though the pair had not yet seen anyone, it still followed a certain connection, flying directly towards the palace beneath the sea surface, chasing after the master of the place. Inside the divine palace, wine flowed and laughter filled the air. At this moment, inside Poseidon's palace, the true Sea Empress Amphitrite had long left for places unknown. Most of those who remained were the attendants Poseidon had found from various places. Some had been sought out, while others outright carried the blood of Poseidon. This wasn't unusual among the chaotic gods. The reason Amphitrite wasn't here had nothing to do with these matters. After all, although she did not like Poseidon's behavior, she lacked Hera's power and status. If the Sea Emperor wanted to indulge in pleasure, then she could only choose to endure it. It wasn't until she realized that more and more peculiar life forms that made her uncomfortable were appearing in the divine palace that Amphitrite finally awoke to the truth and then moved to another place to live. She thought she understood why Poseidon had lost interest in her. It wasn't because of the chase she had deliberately created before their marriage, but because his tastes were inherently different. Of course, strictly speaking, there was also a bit of that factor involved. Poseidon certainly felt annoyed by Amphitrite's once unperceptive behavior, but there was also a bit of too many exotic beauties to attend to, neglecting this woman. It is worth mentioning here that Poseidon could certainly discern beauty and would consider Athena and Aphrodite to possess top-tier attractiveness. It's just that the scope of his recognition was a bit wider. Those exotics he selected, if judged according to their own racial standards, were also quite beautiful. This was somewhat similar to the legends of the dragon race in later times, where a stunningly beautiful princess was to be seized, as was a beauty, from the dog-headed folk. Thus, in his own palace, Poseidon was enjoying the dance and song before him until a streak of golden light flashed before his eyes. Swish! Suddenly startled, Poseidon's immense divine power was unleashed, instantly causing nearly all the creatures in the palace to die or be injured. Yet, he was unfazed by this and swiftly reached out, trying to catch the gleam of gold. An ambush, without a doubt. However, the power it carried was not strong. Although Poseidon did not know who dared to interrupt his pleasure, he swore to himself that he would make them understand the consequences of disrupting him in his domain. Poof! In the blink of an eye, as the thought flashed through his mind, the golden light had already arrived. Unexpectedly, he was unable to block the beam of light. The golden arrow pierced through, or, rather, ignored the divine power on his hand, directly contacting his palm and disappearing in an instant. There was no time for any reaction. Once everything was over, Poseidon looked at his own palm. There was no wound. The golden light seemed like an illusion. What is this? Quote. Question mark exclamation mark quote. Surprise and confusion arose in his heart. Just as Poseidon was about to do something, he suddenly stopped. For some reason, a fiery emotion surged from his heart, an affection toward his older sister Demeter. Quote. Quote. After a long silence, and perhaps a brief struggle, Poseidon ultimately gave in to the sensation in his heart. He looked around his palace, and the lives farther away that were not affected by his power. Demeter was his true love. What did these others matter? So without hesitation, the Sea Emperor pressed his hand down, and within 100 miles, a stillness settled instantly. After doing this, Poseidon calmed down a little bit. His reason told him that his current state was abnormal, and it must have something to do with the streak of golden light. But the gods of chaos mostly act on emotion over reason. Thus, this brief moment of clarity was fleeting, and almost without further thought, he decided to consider the matter later. C 452-122 Wandering Mind _2. Now, finding his sister was the most important thing. Transformed into a beam of light, Poseidon flew towards the north. He had also heard of the harsh winter stirred up by Demeter, and now, it seemed she was in a human tribe. Behind a cloud over the ocean. All right, work's done. Next, we just wait at that goddess's place. Clapping his hands, Volos said contentedly. His golden arrow would keep going forward until it hit its target. Although there were beings in this world that could stop it, at least Poseidon probably didn't have that ability. And now, the feeling that came to him was indeed so. Without any surprises, his arrow had hit the target. Good. Speaking of which, that goddess seems to be in a temple built for her in that human kingdom. Nodding lightly, Eros said with a bit of longing. I wonder when we can find some believers to play with, and then have them build a temple for us too. Better not. Rejecting the idea offhand, Volos gave an irrefutable reason. I think humans are quite foolish. It's better to stay away from them. We are gods who control desire, not gods controlled by desire. But, from what I see, humans seem quite easily controlled by their own emotions, especially those among them who hold the highest status. Quote. Okay, you're right, let's not have any believers then. After a moment of thought, Eros felt persuaded and agreed that she indeed should stay away from them. Their idle chat ended, and she prepared to leave with Volos. However, at this moment, a loud noise came from the ocean surface below. A blue light split the sea, turning all nearby life to dust in an instant. Immediately after, Poseidon's figure leapt out from the ocean and flew towards the north. It worked. But, Are arrows fueled by mortal hatred really that powerful? Volos was somewhat surprised and puzzled as he felt the surge of emotions in the Sea Emperor's heart, that possessiveness for his sister Demeter, but it seemed a bit too intense. That's probably because he has always had such thoughts. Ew. Stay away from me too. Looking at Volos beside her, Eros made a face of disgust. Her 11 or 12-year-old appearance combined with her current expression made for a somewhat adorably contradictory sight. Cut it out, Eros. As split gods of desire, the last thing that could happen is us developing feelings for each other. Volos smirked, knowing the other was joking, so he didn't take it seriously but just called out. Let's go. Follow him. With a call, Volos took the lead, and after a laugh, Eros also followed suit. The great drama was unfolding right before them, and they didn't want to miss such a scene. The spirit realm, the fifth layer. In the chaotic space-time, as always quiet, only now there was an addition that looked like a mere point of light on the outside but seemed infinitely vast on the inside, a phantasmal kingdom. Sitting cross-legged in the void, above Laine's head and below his feet were the increasingly stable interfaces of positive and negative energy. A certain connection between them was becoming more and more intimate, which gradually brought balance to the two energy planes, which had initially been unbalanced. However, at this moment, Laine's mind was not on them, but on the movements of the outside world. Of course, Laine wasn't paying attention to that small human kingdom either. Although he did take note of everything that happened there because of the twins of desire, he didn't have any surplus thoughts about the whole event. Whether it was Metanira or Demeter, their actions were not worth much attention. After all, the first half of the event's development was extremely similar to later myths, and the unfolding of the latter half seemed quite normal. Compared to the future deeds of a king named Tantalus, a son of Zeus, the affair between the goddess and the queen was truly trivial, and he had no intention of intervening. He would not even have remembered such a minor matter if it hadn't involved the changing of the seasons. As for what Laine was doing now, that was naturally waiting to observe an important memory. Hundreds of years ago, after that divine battle had ended, Laine had handed over his divine artifact to Athena, allowing her to peer into past memories. During this period, the goddess of wisdom had used it more than once, trying to understand the whereabouts of her mother goddess, who had once resided in Zeus' head alongside herself. However, it might have been that that period indeed had some higher order influence, or perhaps it was the subtle interference of fate, or both. Every time Athena tried to explore that brief but significant past from her dim pre-birth memories, she would always encounter some invisible disturbance, and then her focus would shift to other matters. Most of what she found was emptiness, but there were a few instances with content, mostly when Zeus made use of Métis, wisdom and authority. Every time this happened, the divine king had no choice but to relax the seal on the goddess. It might not have been enough to free Métis from his imprisonment, but it did allow a tiny bit of the outside world to seep through, unheard by Athena in her unconscious state. These things would not have come back to her normally, but now, with the influence of the divine artifact, Athena remembered them one by one. Of course, although these were also gains, which let the goddess understand a side of her father god not known to others, Athena ultimately remembered what she was truly searching for. Some higher power was always interfering with her, which seemed difficult, but these were her own memories, real and existing. So when she found that clever methods couldn't do the job, Athena resolutely chose the foolish way. If she couldn't pinpoint that period, then she would just extract all the memories before her birth one by one. This simplest and most brute force method, also the most time-consuming and strenuous one, was not affected by that underlying influence. Thus, over the past several centuries, Athena spent most of her time dwelling on her past. Although much of it was cumbersome and futile, luckily, recently this exploration of memory finally reached its end. When all the useless parts were isolated, what remained could no longer conceal its existence. So on a small island in the East Sea, Athena in a long gown took out a scroll. For the last time, she activated the divine artifact, pressing it against her smooth forehead, and with this act, both history and memory acted upon the goddess. The secret was about to be unveiled, a tinge of emotion induced flush flitting across Athena's face. It was also at this moment that Laine's gaze shifted away from the twins and towards the goddess on the island. He too was exceedingly expectant about the results of this inquiry. Come on, let me see what exactly you did. The voice echoed in the void, Laine's gaze flickering slightly. The next moment, as if something had changed, his body remained seated in place, but his divine essence seemed to have left his body. The last exploration was different from the previous ones, as Laine chose not to merely watch, using the power of the divine artifact to browse through memory fragments. He knew well that this memory might involve a clash at the world level, so it was influenced by extremely high powers. If he waited for the divine artifact to present the records on its own, the crucial parts would probably all be blurred. And as for asking Athena afterwards, putting aside other issues, even if she was willing to tell Laine the whole story without omission, some mysteries can only be grasped and understood by seeing with one's own eyes. Like the rune symbols, what was recorded in the primordial codex was completely different from what was later spread. Over the years, Laine had not been short on consulting the codex from Odin's treasury, and he learned many useful things each time. The closer the information is to its source, the more true and complete it is. Thus Laine had to see for himself. If there's anything in the chaos world that might have even a slight resistance to the powers at the world level, it could only be Laine himself. So when he conceived this thought, the divine body he left behind became an empty shell. Laine's spirit departed his body silently and joined Athena above the East Sea, entering the deep recesses of her memory. Intuition told Laine, this journey into memory would perhaps be quite interesting. And what he was about to see would probably be not just the experiences of Zeus ascension rituals. C 453 to 123, The False World. A sweep of darkness. It felt as if plunged into the cold emptiness of the void, thoughts frozen, surrounded by an icy touch. Only in the depths of the spirit, some extraordinary power radiated warmth, driving away that coldness. Bizarre visions flashed by in an instant, returning to nothingness, but the sensation of cold grew ever stronger. Laine was well aware that this was likely the residual influence of the world. The power from the 9 realms had been erased both in the past and the future, so the only force truly affecting this memory was that belonging to chaos. It instinctively prevented the probing of other lives, but wouldn't actively react in other obvious ways, so while its presence made Laine feel conceptually cold, it went no further than that. Thus, the journey continued, and with it, the concept of time blurred. It felt like a day, or perhaps a second, when at a certain moment, Laine seemed to catch a glimpse of a strand of color. Whoosh. The flow of space-time, the leap of ages, as if breaking through a membrane, entering a world of illusion. When Laine regained consciousness once more, he found, to his astonishment, that he was not as he had imagined, upon Mount Olympus or inside Asgard in the Chaos world. These two places were where Zeus was most likely to have obtained that peculiar ritual, and even Laine was prepared to see Odin here. But at this moment, his surroundings were unfamiliar, and he stood upon a slightly damaged city wall. A great battle seemed to have just ended, with an air of solemnity lingering all around. Not far off, many mortals moved about. Some bore wounds and moaned in pain, while others donned armor and kept vigilant, patrolling the area. Nearer, hundreds appeared slaves. They carried heavy stones, seemingly engaged in the reconstruction of the damaged wall. And that was just nearby. Further afield, both within and without the city walls, crowds of people gathered, each under different banners. And Laine's current location was right at a breach in the wall. Who are you? Raise your hands. A sharp cry shattered the silence. Instantly, Laine's presence drew the gaze of everyone nearby. Clearly, no matter how he had appeared here, the sudden emergence of a stranger amid post-war tension sparked an immediate nerve. 24 soldiers raised their weapons, their eyes tense and filled with intent to kill, as if ready for conflict at the slightest provocation. From a distance, sensing disturbance, even more soldiers were approaching. As for the one who had just shouted, he looked to be the captain of this troop of soldiers. He was calling out to Laine, but as the initial surprise faded, although Laine heard the soldiers' warnings, he obviously had no intention of complying. Instead, he scrutinized his environment with greater depth, gazed up at the sky and down at the earth, and finally sensed his own power. The law of this world was strikingly similar to the present world, some force trying to bind him, and an impression of reality that seemed true yet somehow hollow. However, Laine was certain that this hollow reality would not have been detected by any other primordial deity. For, although this world seemed somewhat artificial, the essence of the force constituting this artifice was sufficiently high. Numbers were sparse, sure, but at higher levels, quantity was useless compared to quality. The flesh mother tree with just a few higher traits rendered Erebus utterly powerless against it, and although Laine was not clear about the details of this event, his understanding of truly creation-level powers was evidently more profound. As for this almost non-existent force, one needed not think too hard to know it was likely that remnant world force on the memory. To this plane of existence, information, matter, and energy made no difference. Even if only a memory in one's mind, its power was as real as any. At least I can be certain that Zeus's transformation and ritual are indeed related to the world itself. The force wrapping around the memory does not come because Zeus is the destined divine king but because the content in this memory involves the world itself. As for the current situation, this is not some parallel universe, the chaos world does not entertain such notions. Nor is it some traversal through past and future, such ludicrous events would not occur to me. If the future were truly reachable, then this world would already be dead, indicating that it has lost all its unknowns and potentials, and with it, its reason to exist. This feeling is a bit like a possibility of fate, momentarily realized, under the creation level power, though it still can't disguise its falsehood. And this world, let's just call it a world for now, seemed to attempt to restrict my power the moment I entered, though it was pointless. Lastly, from the current structure of the world, this place is chaos, but without any trace of the spirit realm's existence. In almost an instant, Laine made the above judgments. This should not be any sort of time travel or dimensional crossing. He well remembered his purpose for this journey. He was here to search for the memory of Zeus's secret. So, no matter what changes occurred, this place should still be that memory. C 454 to 123, the false world _2. However, from the current situation, it seems that this ephemeral memory has experienced a small accident. Under the influence of the power of the world, perhaps also affected by some subjective will, it has changed. It is no longer a mere existence for people to observe, but has transformed into a cage for outsiders. Yes, a cage. If one excludes his own subtle yet real higher nature, Laine could almost be certain that even he would be trapped in this memory, struggling to escape for a considerable length of time. And this is likely the very purpose of this fantasy world's existence. Is it Zeus? Doesn't quite seem like it, but can't completely rule out the possibility. Quote. However, no matter what, this is indeed quite a surprise. Shaking his head slightly, it must be said, this was the second time Laine had found himself surprised by Zeus and his ritual. But this isn't too strange after all, since Zeus himself may not be considered very strong, but as long as he remains the recognized divine king of the present world, it's normal for some things to happen. Of course, in the end, the reason why Laine is indifferent is because whoever is responsible, their plans have obviously fallen through. If this is a cage, then since he is in fact not restrained, he already holds the absolute initiative in this unexpected game. Moreover, Laine is curious to know, since that meager world force constitutes this false interface, if he were to destroy this world, where would that force go? It certainly wouldn't return to the world itself. After all, as mentioned before, since it exists as information within this memory, it should naturally change along with the ownership of the memory. If chaos had consciousness, it wouldn't be so simple. But as with every past occurrence, it has no logic or thought. Attack! Take down this foreigner! A fierce shout suddenly erupted, pulling Laine's thoughts back to reality. Perhaps having confirmed that they do not recognize this outsider, the soldiers of the city have already begun to advance with swords drawn. Their captain charged at Laine first, determination and intent to kill in his eyes, while the rest sought to encircle from either side. As soldiers, their tactics were indeed proper. However, these were clearly methods meant only to deal with fellow mortals. Even those whose divine blood had diluted over time could crush this small squad of mere dozens with absolute power. Of course, these soldiers were more intent on buying time since this was, after all, their city. However, as their target, Laine had no intention of playing along with them, so. Halt. As his words fell, an invisible wave spread out, and in the next moment, the surrounding soldiers became rigid on the spot. As if time had been stilled, they could not move even a fraction of their bodies. In their midst, there was only one exception, and that was the leading captain. However, it wasn't that he had the power to resist Laine, but that he was the only one spared. Tell me, soldier, where is this place? His voice was calm as Laine asked indifferently, demonstrating an irresistible power and then inquiring for the information he desired should yield a swift response. But before Laine, the soldier was not afraid. Evil outsider, do you think you can make me submit? No matter which deity you are, you have no right to intervene in this battle. Even feigning ignorance is futile. Your actions are under the gaze of the gods. you will surely be punished, an inescapable outcome, for such is the will of the great Zeus. Quote. Is that so? After a moment of silence, Laine nodded in recognition of the soldier's conviction, then reached out and gently touched his brow. The next moment, the soul of the soldier was extracted. Mortals aren't like deities, they can't truly protect their secrets before Laine. His choice to ask was merely a habit. But when he dropped this habit, a memory, neither clearly true nor false, soon emerged in his mind. Quote. I see. Having learned the truth, Laine scrutinized the unfamiliar surroundings once more and finally understood the source of his initial familiarity. The walls beneath his feet contained sacred power, capable of repelling and weakening the destruction wrought by demigods and deities, a creation beyond the work of mortals. And outside the city, uncountable tents and armies gathered. There, divine power manifested itself within the camps, with similar auras also rising within the city, the owners of these auras possessing extraordinary strength, able to defeat deities that had come to the mortal realm to some extent. As for the city, it was famously known in later ages. It represented the end of Chaos's mythology, the end of the era of gods and demigods, one side of the 10-year war, the legendary city of Troy. Only now, the war might have just begun. Because, as the soldier had just said, Zeus had just resolved on Mount Olympus to forbid the gods from meddling in the conflicts of the mortal realm. From this, one could infer that the true climax of the war has yet to come. C 455-123, The False World _3. What a pity, this isn't real. With a sigh, Laine felt a tinge of regret. If this were the real world, he would have indeed liked to stay a bit longer, to witness firsthand this epic that was supposed to unfold in the future. Even Heracles, who had passed through the 12 labors, existed at this time. But reality held no ifs, a fabrication would remain so, unrealizable no matter what. Laine had not forgotten that he had merely entered into a segment of memory, and even though it had been influenced by the creation force, a memory or a piece of fate was not enough to evolve into a true world. Everything happening here was probably without any referential value in the present world. Moreover, this fabricated world evolved from the memory seemed to represent the original fate, to be more precise, a world without the existence of Laine. Since that's the case, go tell your gods, go pray to the great Zeus. Tell him, someone has defied his command, and will soon witness his divine power on Mount Olympus. With a gentle wave of his hand, the soldiers who were previously immobilized collapsed to the ground one after another. Without giving them another glance, Laine turned around and spoke with a calm voice. I will, and the king of all gods will see everything you've done, and then as he promised, he will send down your punishment. Raising their heads proudly, some people shouted back. Like many in this era, not everyone understood the reverence due to an unknown deity, everyone from kings to commoners acted this way. And Laine had no intention of fussing over it further. After all, when this illusory world vanished, everything would also crumble into oblivion. Now, before setting out to destroy this world, there were two issues that truly piqued his curiosity. One was whether this fake world had replicated the existence of primordial deities. Although the probability was low, he still wanted to take a closer look. The other question was how Athena, who had entered with him, was faring now. Unlike him, this false world seemed to have replicated the fate without Laine, which placed him directly at the most critical place in that fate, above the walls of Troy, but Athena was different. In this world's Mount Olympus, there already existed a Athena. No hurry, first to the Underworld, to see if the realm of eternal night and lightless exists. Regardless of the outcome, then I'll take action to destroy it. Then to Olympus, to see what Zeus is really up to, if indeed this has anything to do with him. Having made his decision, Laine cast one last look at this mortal city. At this moment, his previous regret had gradually faded away. With his presence, all was destined not to play out this way. In the real world, this history would be even more grandiose. It won't be long. Far off, there seemed to be someone approaching quickly, but Laine had no intention of waiting. What was the point of witnessing falsehoods? Better to wait for reality, to then see the real performance of the heroes of these times. Early morning, Mount Olympus. Time and space shifted, reality and illusion interchanged, as if passing through prolonged periods. Like Laine, Athena too felt no cold sensation from the world's forces and, at a certain moment when everything came to an end, she finally regained consciousness, slowly opening her eyes. Then the next moment, to her astonishment, she found herself inside the palace of the divine court, surrounded by deities she recognized and some she did not. They differed somewhat from the gods in her memory, but overall, she could still identify them. At this moment, they were standing to both sides, gathered around Zeus. Initially, Athena even thought she had been caught prying into memories, but then she felt something was off. Around her, no one gazed her way, they were all looking up at Zeus, the highest among them, even the herself, from this world was doing the same. This king of all gods was somewhat different from the one in Athena's memory, he was stronger, more casual, and indisputably authoritative. At this moment, Zeus was unabashedly exuding his presence, as if lecturing to the deities, and every deity present had no choice but to listen intently. Listen, all gods and goddesses, I announce my decree here. From this day forth, should I discover any deity daring to defy my command, going to the battlefields of the mortal realm to aid the armies of those city-states, then upon their return to Olympus, my thunder will bring them to utter humiliation. Or perhaps, I will pick them up and hurl them into the depths of Tartarus, as far as the underworld is from the sky and the earth. Thus, maybe then you will understand, no one dares defy my command. Surveying the deities, the divine king declared loudly, come now, gods of Olympus, I know you're displeased with this, among those warring humans, there are those you favor, but such is my will. If you wish to challenge my authority, feel free to give it a try. Let me lower a golden rope from the sky, you all stand at the other end of the rope. Even if you exhaust all your strength, you cannot shake the supreme king. And with just a slight effort, I can lift you all up, including the earth and the endless ocean. C 456 to 124 all. Atop Mount Olympus, standing amidst the gods, Athena quietly listened to the edicts of Zeus. The sudden change of environment, the different aura of the deities around her, everything was somewhat beyond the goddess of wisdom's expectations. She had merely been probing her own memories, yet she didn't expect such events to occur, especially as the words of Zeus came to an end. Athena noticed that the gaze of the gods seemingly swept over her. Or more accurately, not just her but also Hera and Aphrodite, only more so directed at her. Realizing this shift, Athena seemed to understand something. Everything was clearly related to what Zeus had previously stated. His references to the battlegrounds of the mortal realm, the armies of city-states, must be deeply connected to her and the other two deities, to the extent that all the gods were awaiting their reaction. As for why more gazes were turned toward her, the goddess of wisdom faintly felt that it might be because at this moment, she had become the second only to the divine king on Mount Olympus. It wasn't that the gods had become weaker, but rather, she now seemed stronger. At least compared to before, this familiar yet strange body of hers housed a power far greater, almost at the pinnacle of the gods. Thinking swiftly in her heart, Athena suppressed the inexplicable thoughts and reeled in her dispersed focus. Regardless, no matter how powerful she was now, the divine king before her was only stronger. In response to the edict of Zeus, passivity was not advisable, nor was direct confrontation appropriate. Therefore, based on the information she could grasp at present, the goddess made a simple judgment of the situation. She decided to grant herself more leeway and, for now, deal with the matters at hand. Hence, after a brief silence, the goddess slightly lifted her head, and under the attentive or neglectful gazes of the gods, Athena broke the silence atop Mount Olympus. Son of Cronus, sovereign of gods, master of the sky and earth, your power is undeniable, how could any god entertain the thought of challenging you? Nevertheless, I still grieve for the loss and suffering of those beings of wisdom. They are destined to face a tragic fate, their blood to flow in rivers beneath high walls and across the wilderness, and all this could have been avoided. There was a tinge of sorrow in her tone, and as Athena's compassionate words were spoken, the atmosphere in the hall seemed to ease slightly. At the intersection of the gods' gazes, Zeus too revealed a smile. Above the mount of the gods, the clouds that had gathered due to the will of the Lord of the Thousand Thunders slowly dissipated, symbolizing the change in their master's mood. Gazing at the most radiant among the gods, the divine king spoke with a smile. Do not be disheartened, Tritogenia, another name for Athena, my most cherished daughter. The affairs of the mortal realm will achieve their deserved outcome. My words are not meant as a harsh reprimand. I always bear goodwill towards you. No one dared to contradict him, and it was only natural, for everyone knew the power of the divine king, and thus Zeus relaxed his stern expression. Ever since Poseidon had stirred up a laughable rebellion, the divine king often employed this method to remind these eternal deities. Now that his will had been carried out once again, the impromptu assembly could come to an end. Now, it was time for him to descend to the mortal realm to steer the human war towards the outcome he desired. Indeed, Zeus had forbidden the gods, but not himself. He had his own personal reasons for issuing such a decree. However, just as the divine king was about to summon his chariot, a streak of light crossing the distant horizon suddenly caught his attention. Hermes, what brings you here? Surprised, the divine king paused his steps. His gaze turned beyond the mount of the gods, and swiftly, that figure rapidly entered the perception of the deities. Standing aside, Athena silently observed this scene. Another god she had not seen before. Hermes. The goddess silently noted the name. After a while, as the streak of light descended to the ground, a youthful deity with the appearance of a young man appeared before the gods. A hint of irreverent amusement played at the corners of his mouth, making him seem like a cunning and clever individual. His gaze flicked over the gods and settled on the divine king, and then he made a slight gesture to his chest. Respectful king of all gods, my formidable father, just as you commanded, I have honored your decree and conveyed the gods' non-interventionist oracle to the mortal realm. There was a slight pause in his tone as he discreetly observed the expressions of the gods before continuing. But as I was preparing to return, Your Majesty, an unexpected situation arose in the city of Troy in the mortal realm. A strange deity attacked the city guards and ignored your orders. Even in the end, according to the humans present, he declared that he would come to Olympus, to this dwelling place of the gods, to witness your unmatched power. In the original myths, the wind gods were not Zeus's confidants. In contrast, as a son of the divine king, ruling over travel, thievery, and eloquence, Hermes was the messenger of the gods. And prior to this, he was the one who had delivered Zeus's oracle to the humans. Now, he also brought back this unexpected news. Moreover, he didn't express any personal opinions, as before. This time, Hermes stated the situation truthfully, without mixing in any other thoughts. C 457 to 124 all. Openly defying the divine king was not without precedent, but those who had done so were either special deities like the heavenly empress or the sea emperor, or they had already suffered terrible punishments. Hermes did not intend to get involved in this, and when his voice fell, Olympus once again fell silent. In silence, the clouds once again gathered. The divine king was still smiling, but his smile now had a trace of coldness. An unfamiliar deity. Hermes, this is quite rare. Your Majesty, perhaps he was newly born, unaware of your power, similar to what the goddess of beauty once was. This is entirely understandable, he replied politely, while blinking in the direction of Aphrodite. The embodiment of love and beauty had intimate relationships with many of the gods of Mount Olympus, and Hermes was no exception. You are right, my child, I should always be extra tolerant of the offenses of the ignorant. The divine king nodded slightly, acknowledging this rationale. However, to confirm this, he looked again at his messenger. In front of Hermes, Laine's apparition had been conjured. This was an entity he had never seen before, perhaps indeed a newly born deity. Does anyone recognize him? Asked the divine king, to which the gods all shook their heads. Seeing this, Zeus narrowed his eyes and said with a smile. Since no one knows him, then perhaps it is as Hermes has said, so let's wait here for him. If he has come to witness my power, then I will grant him this opportunity. As the king of all gods, it is only proper to show such magnanimity. The longer one lives, the more often strange beings come to challenge him, and it was not uncommon for mortals and deities alike. Thus, after a brief surge of anger, Zeus instead relaxed his mood, seeing this as an amusement and an opportunity to demonstrate his power once again. Engrossed in his thoughts, Zeus did not notice the brief look of astonishment that flashed in Athena's eyes upon seeing the image of that unfamiliar god. The goddess recognized his presence. He was the one who had once entrusted her with a divine artifact. What truly surprised her, though, was not just this fact. For just now, the apparition that Hermes had projected seemed to nod at her. In the underworld, within the Narcissus plains. Walking on the gray land, Laine casually observed his surroundings. Previously, he had examined the vicinity in turn. Unlike the real underworld, this version in the tapestry of fate had neither the comings and goings of wraiths nor any trace of the primordial deities. Places like the abyss and the land of eternal night certainly existed, but they were merely that, existent. Yet, within them, Laine felt no semblance of consciousness. Just as he had thought before, this world had no trace of a second great divine power. Whether this was because the scant creation force was insufficient for this task, or simply because it was never done, was unknown. But this only made Laine surer. False as false, even if it was Zeus of this counterfeit world, his power was likely mostly a matter of setting. After all, Even though to the creation force, all things are equivalent, the information carried within a fragment of memory is insufficient to transform into such vast energy. And these souls, they are nothing but copies, he muttered. His gaze swept across the surroundings. The underworld in this original version of fate was much livelier than in reality. Perhaps because of the great wars in the mortal realm, the souls of the deceased had flocked to the underworld. Crowds of figures paid their silver coins obolus and were ferried across, then walked some distance until they arrived at a grand palace to face the judgment of the three underworld judges. Unlike the spirit realm in reality, which judged a soul based on abilities and deeds during life, these three, who in life were renowned humans and then elevated upon death, rendered the fate of mortal souls on the simple scales of good and evil. Those lives interwoven with good and evil would stay here, in what was known as the Narcissus Plains, a place covered in fields of golden wheat. They fed on it, and as they wandered, their memories of life were gradually erased, along with any trace of their existence. The souls, evil, far outweighing good, would be sent near Tartarus to endure punishment. The gods had built a massive prison there to confine these sinners. And those with good, far outweighing evil, could continue on, enjoying an eternal and blissful life in the Elysian fields constructed by the gods until the last of their soul energy was consumed and they dissipated into the world. As for the judgment of good and evil in a person's life, it's quite an obvious matter. Those who are devout and faithful are undoubtedly the most good, while the opposite is considered the most evil. In other standards of judgment, there is also a strong tint of subjectivity. However, this is normal, for the judges and paradises established by the gods are naturally prepared for the devout. Deciding good and evil based on faith doesn't seem so strange after all. So for the people who originally existed in this world, after she enters, will she merge into one with her former self? Eyes flickering, Laine had already bypassed the judges and arrived within the fields of truth. However, at this moment, it was the scene of Hermes on Mount Olympus morphing his image that appeared. Following this intangible connection, Laine directly saw everything happening there. In a myriad of falseness, suddenly having one truth was undoubtedly very conspicuous. What really intrigued Laine was whether this meant that Athena had also seen the future. Although it was just the future as it was originally. He watched as the goddess cleverly found an excuse to temporarily leave the company of the other gods and headed straight to her palace. And as one could almost envision, the first thing Athena would observe was the history under this particular trajectory of destiny. What had happened in the past, what role she played in it, why this world looked so similar to the original yet differed in myriad ways. Once she looked, such confusion would almost certainly emerge in Athena's heart, and then she would try to explore the reasons behind it. The thing is, it is already the third epoch now, simply regard the original trajectory as something to be viewed. Withdrawing his attention, Laine refocused his thoughts on the underworld. Before him, a figure had appeared without him noticing. The master of the underworld had detected him, or rather, had been aware of him the moment he unguardedly set foot upon this land. Yet it wasn't until Laine reached this point that Hades felt he had no choice but to confront him. Even though he did not detect the aura of this unknown deity, Hades had been feeling an alarm in his heart. So, if possible, he truly did not wish to face Laine. Strange deity, why have you come? Speaking cautiously, Hades could not simply ignore the presence at his doorstep, regardless of everything. I have come for destruction. With sincere tone, Laine replied. Destruction. Has some mortal provoked you, and you wish to bestow upon him eternal punishment? With eyebrows relaxing, Hades inquired. If that were the case, then it was not a matter of great concern. He had been wondering why this deity had come directly to the fields of truth. The Olympian gods had similar wants in the past but never informed him about them. They would simply take away or do something, never regarding him with any importance. If that were the case, then I agree. No, you misunderstand. Shaking his head slightly, Laine looked at Hades. I am referring to everything. Every soul. That's probably not such a good idea. With a tone carrying a trace of astonishment, this time, Hades couldn't help but sound dismissive. It was not that no god ever came here to claim the souls of some mortals, but to ask for all was a bit too extreme. Of course not every soul. With a smile, Laine slowly corrected. By everything, I mean this entire world. C 458 to 125, the path to dismembering the origin. Under the dim sky, the glow from the flowing river of molten lava brightened half of the sky. On the vast land below, the souls of mortals were faint and sporadic. This was a scene rarely seen in the reality of the Underworld. As the ruler of the Underworld, Hades had been particularly busy lately because the great war among mortals had brought the underlying conflicts among the Olympian gods to the surface, and the death toll of humans kept rising, resulting in a massive influx of souls into the Underworld. However, watching the gods wage war upon the earth while remaining as an onlooker, Hades found some pleasure amidst the busyness, but now, his good mood had come to an end. Looking at the stranger before him, Hades's expression grew increasingly somber. Often, Hades did not care about how outsiders viewed him, so even though there were no temples dedicated to him on the surface, and mortals still widely believed that he trembled at the powers of other deities, he didn't react too strongly. Whether it was those prejudices or formalities, if they did not bring him any tangible benefits, Hades did not care much. In this regard, he was more pragmatic than his father. Cronus might still care about appearances, but to Hades, they were worthless. Therefore, Hades had no intention of provoking this strange deity, unless he had claimed to want to destroy the Underworld. After all, as the god of the Underworld, he was a part of the Underworld itself, and its destruction would mean his own. Indeed, Hades did not take Laine's words to mean the whole world but thought he was referring to the Underworld only. Though, just as a god cannot commit suicide, even Hades himself did not know how the Underworld could be destroyed. Strange deity, I think it would be better for you to take back your words. The voice turned cold, seeming to realize the visitor's ill intent. Silently, the authority over half of the Underworld began to converge upon Hades. With the power of the realm enhancing him, an intangible pressure enveloped the entire fields of truth. However, even so, the power Hades displayed at this moment was actually less than his real self in reality. Due to Laine's vague influences, even though he had been stripped of his authority over souls, the power of the Underworld in reality had not diminished but increased compared to its original path. Although in myths, mortal souls do exist within the Underworld, they do not truly benefit the place. It was the Titan Iapetus who was originally the god of souls, and the title, Lord of Shades, was more often associated with Hecate. I don't know what you intend to do, sir, but destroying the Underworld, I must be blunt, I doubt anyone is capable of doing such a thing. Without notice, several streaks of light rose from the divine palace of the Underworld. The god of destruction, the god of doom, and a number of other deities stood behind Hades, all eyeing Laine warily. The Underworld is a part of the world, and not even the king of all gods can destroy it. State your purpose, or stay here forever. The fields of truth may not be Olympus, but it will not tolerate your audacity. Power was latent but not displayed, with only a pressure sweeping over like a blanket. Yet, when it reached the deity before him, it seemed to press upon empty space, making Hades even more vigilant. Hades began to recall if there were any past grudges with this unknown deity, still not taking direct action, since he did not really believe what Laine had said before. Destroying the Underworld was nothing short of fantastical. On the other side, Laine had to admit that if not for this being a fantastical world, Hades would indeed be correct. The Underworld could weaken, could break, but could never be destroyed, unless the perpetrator already possessed the power to oppose the entire world or unless the world itself was preoccupied elsewhere, as the world itself would not allow such a thing to happen, much like anyone wishing to destroy one of the 7 layers of the spirit realm would actually need to have greater power than the entire spirit realm itself. But the current situation was undoubtedly of the latter kind. The faint forces of creation lingering in memory were not substantial. They barely sustained this world's existence and could not bring about any further influence. In such circumstances, what Laine needed to consider was merely how to truly destroy the Underworld at its source. Just as I've been pondering, on some future day when the collision between chaos and the Hemanu world reaches its zenith, how am I to truly obliterate the source of that world? Observing the illusory Underworld as if nobody else was present, the reason Laine had not gone directly to Olympus was not merely to see if the primordial gods existed, as such would be a matter of mere steps for him. In truth, the real reason was that he too was unclear on how to destroy a world. Would mere destruction suffice? Probably not, and absorbing the world holistically from a macro perspective was beyond his current capabilities. Under such conditions, the self-contained realm of the Underworld naturally became the most suitable target. He would use this place for the first experiment, then validate it using the entire illusory world, and the Hemanu world would be when he applied the experimental outcome. Crackle. With a light sound, the black sword, formed by death, was drawn inch by inch from the void. In the absence of any divine artifact specialized in combat, this had become Laine's preferred method. C 459 to 125. The path to dismembering the origin _2. You're right. No one has ever managed to destroy the underworld before, and even in the real world, I can't do it yet, let alone talk about having any experience in it. The voice was calm, as if Laine was talking to himself rather than to these false gods. Hand on the hilt of his sword, he stood in the void with his sword as a prop, his gaze passing over Hades, beyond the entire fields of truth, looking towards the source of this illusory underworld. So although I know it probably won't work, I still want to try. To see how much impact disintegrating the underworld can have on this world. The next moment, his sword tip pressed down, and the final blade touched the underworld soil. In front of Laine, as soon as he drew the black sword, Hades had already made his move. Although his power was contained and did not leak, as the god of the underworld, Hades felt a terrifying threat from that sword. Even though he still didn't believe Laine could destroy the underworld, he couldn't tolerate the other party desecrating the symbol of his godhood. But it was meaningless. Although it seemed right in front of him, it was as distant as the sky. Until Laine pressed down the black sword as if no one were around, Hades couldn't make any meaningful resistance. So under the shocked and furious gaze of the gods of the underworld, that seemingly ordinary black sword touched the soil of the underworld. Splash. At the entrance of the underworld, on the Acheron River, River of Sorrow, Charon sat in his wooden boat, once again heading towards the shore. Lately, because of wars in the mortal realm, his job had become much busier. After all, as the ferryman of the Styx River, only Charon could carry the souls of mortals across this endlessly rolling river. Of course, corresponding to the busyness, his earnings had also increased quite a bit. After all, according to the regulations, each person crossing the river must give Charon a silver coin as the fare for the passage. This is also the origin of a custom in the mortal realm. Even though they dread death so much that they are unwilling to mention the names of the gods of the underworld, mortals still place a silver coin in the mouth of the dead when they bury them. Otherwise, the souls of their loved ones could only wander at the entrance to the underworld or sink to the bottom of the Styx River, unrestful for eternity. Of course, no matter what, Charon is a god, and what he actually needs is not the silver coin itself. What he truly gains is the remembrance placed upon the silver coin by the deceased's family and their awe of him, the ferryman. Hey, I really hope the wars in the mortal realm last a bit longer. Days like these don't come along often. An old smile appeared on his wrinkled face as Charon picked up a goblet of nectar from the boat and took a satisfying sip. He looked towards the shore, where a dense crowd of souls was jostling there. It's just that there's one downside. The times of turmoil seem to have brought a lot of mortals whose bodies are left uncollected after death. He complained casually, but it was a happy trouble, so Charon quickly put it out of his mind. He summoned his power to make his wooden boat significantly faster, hurriedly making his way towards the shore. As he got closer, the eager and awe-filled eyes of the souls became clearer, brightening Charon's mood even more. He knew what these souls were thinking. Staying here meant only enduring the cold wind and hunger, while crossing the Styx River. Even if their actions in life weren't enough to allow them into the Elysian fields, they could at least stay on the Narcissus plains. In this situation, naturally, they were all desperate to leave here first. But the right to choose who gets on the boat first is in my hands. With a sly smile, Charon stood up from the boat, ready to pick out a few pleasing ones. What are they looking at? Suddenly, Charon seemed to notice something different from usual. The souls on the shore were indeed looking in his direction, filled with awe, but also with fear. And some were shouting loudly about something, or kneeling on the ground, trembling with dread. What new trick is this? Unaware of any anomalies, Charon was somewhat puzzled. This was the underworld after all. There might be things that made mortals fear, but certainly not the embodiment of the Styx River. So he leisurely shook his clothes, then turned around to check. I wonder. Whoosh. Darkness swept before his eyes before he could see anything, and before he could react, a flash of black light instantly erased Charon's divine body from this world. Behind him, the black light continued to spread at an inconceivable speed across the Styx River, diffusing far beyond. The souls of mortals were instantly extinguished, the sparse vegetation turned to dust. There was no sound, only disappearance. On the banks of the Acheron River, not a single whisper could be heard. All fell silent, and only the Styx River continued to flow. After a while, the water rippled slightly. Through the surface of the river, one could see a phantom shadow coalescing below the water. As the ferryman of the Styx River, Charon obviously hadn't died just now. But as he regained his senses from the recent shock, he was still somewhat bewildered. What just happened? Feeling lost, Karen didn't know what had happened, but the inexplicable force just now seemed to come from the direction of the fields of truth. So he looked through the river's surface towards the center of the underworld. Everything was as usual, as if the recent horror were but a dream. Except for the underworld being emptier, there was only that black spot high in the sky. C 460 to 125. The path to dismembering the origin _3. Backquote backquote backquote. Backquote backquote backquote. It seemed he had noticed something. Karen abruptly turned his gaze toward the distant sky. It wasn't just a black dot but a figure at the highest point. In a flicker, the figure appeared somewhat disappointed, shook his head, then, gripping a longsword, slashed downwards. Boom. An inexplicable sense of alarm surged in his heart, a feeling of fear conveyed by the Styx River itself to Karen. Instinctively wanting to flee, he found there was nowhere to hide. The next moment, as if it were a continuation of the previous changes, when the black sword pressed down, the entire realm shook with it. The water of the Styx River churned out of its banks, the molten magma of the fire river flowed through fissures in the ground, and then everything came to a halt with a sword slash that split the entire underworld from east to west, as if everything had utterly died. The river of sorrow was no exception. This river which caused all who approached to sink to the bottom and wail in despair, now also seemed to have lost its vitality. Even as the riverbanks cracked, its waters remained still. Karen's consciousness swirled and danced in the river. He felt no pain because he knew that he was about to become yet another deity to sleep eternally. No, in this instant, the Styx River ferryman, hovering between life and death, seemed to sense something. He wouldn't rest eternally, because of that sense of falsehood and emptiness pervading everything. The next moment, Karen's consciousness was completely extinguished. In this false world, he was the first deity of chaos to die, but he would not be the last, for high above, Laine once again raised the edge of his sword. Clang. Flicking the sword's blade, although it was a temporarily condensed black sword of authority, it now seemed to have taken on a physical form. Listening to the crisp and pleasant metallic tremor, Laine gazed down upon the underworld. This was the seventh sword strike. It had eradicated the creatures of the underworld, split the axis of its land, and calmed the three Styx rivers. Looking out now, the entirety of the underworld appeared as if stricken by an apocalyptic disaster. But this was only the perspective of mere mortals. If one looked beyond appearances and gazed directly at the origin of all things, Laine would be startled to find that what he had done was actually of very limited use. The world is physical, it is spiritual, and it is conceptual. In what he had just done, at best, he had damaged its physical structure, and even when reflected at the origin, the impact on the underworld was not as dramatic as imagined. It would be wounded, but it was just wounded. Stop. What on earth are you trying to do? A roar interrupted Laine's thoughts. Not far away, Hades with his severed arm watched the strange deity with incomprehension. The power of this being was unimaginable. Hades had attempted to stop him once, but the sword light had almost instantly erased his arm, then continued to tear through the ground. You cannot destroy the underworld, just as you cannot kill me. Your actions will enrage the entire world, just like Typhon, the king of all monsters who once sought to destroy the world. You. No, we are not the same. Interrupting, Laine lifted his head to look at Hades in front of him. The previously elusive train of thought suddenly connected. He needed a method, a way to directly harm the origin of the world, something that mere destruction of physical structure could not achieve. And now, looking at the armless Hades, Laine suddenly understood. Deities are the delegates of laws, the origin of a deity is the most direct path to the origin. As for the essence of immortality, this illusory world has none, and neither do the gods of Egypt, above and below Hypnos. C 461 to 126. Death in the netherworld under the blazing sun. We are not the same. Standing in the sky of the underworld, not a single drop of blood flowed from Hades' severed arm. It was as if that limb had never existed. Some terrible power prevented the regeneration of Hades' divine body, delaying his recovery to his original form. But in that moment, Hades disregarded his own physical incompleteness and the pain feedback from his godhood, and looked directly into the eyes of the outsider, despite the mountainous and oceanic pressure. Devoid of any emotion, in the outsider's gaze, Hades saw not a hint of regard for life. It was as if he wasn't seeing another deity, but an object, a lifeless thing. Even inferior to how a deity might view a mortal. Hades didn't know that, even if his own divinity hadn't reached the point of cold indifference to all beings, Laine couldn't possibly harbor any emotion for an entity in a false world. He simply took it as a sign of the outsider's resolute intent. So, in that moment, Hades cast aside all his past understanding. He didn't know why the outsider really dared to act against the underworld, nor did he understand what he meant by different. But perhaps, as Laine said, this powerful deity that suddenly appeared truly possessed some unknown method. His perception was frantically warning him, an alert coming from the underworld itself. Although by common sense, no amount of power should be able to damage the core of the underworld, Hades trusted the intuition of inherent deities more. If it were the past, like at the dawn of the age when competing for the position of divine king, Hades might have chosen to withdraw, to retreat from the earth into the depths of the darkness. But now, the underworld was right behind him, and he had nowhere left to retreat. At that instant, Hades actually felt a twinge of regret. Unlike his current self, the original trajectory of the underworld had neither wraiths, and Zeus's journey was much smoother. These thoughts inevitably led Hades to reminisce about that day. Maybe he shouldn't have given up back then. Even if he had failed, it would have been better than now, having waited half an era without seeing any possibility for progress. But reality has no ifs. What's missed is missed. What seemed like a long time was but a moment, and Hades, with no retreat, involuntarily took a step forward facing Laine. Come. The ground trembled slightly as if signifying the end of days, and the underworld seemed to sense the will of Hades, unleashing an unprecedented power. The heavens were filled with surging gray light like a rising tide, inch by inch ascending into the sky. This was the pinnacle of Hades' power, an innate backlash of the underworld when wounded, a power of preordained divinity that continued to rise amid passionate emotion. It was enough to cause any true god in the world to retreat, but unfortunately, these struggles were futile before the enemy they faced. With a downward press of his left hand in the void, what had risen in that instant was instantly suppressed, the underworld trembling as a result. The right hand threw the black sword, the gathered power of death dissipating into mist, moving through the air before recongealing into solid form, transforming into a long chain. Under Laine's will, it traversed the void, binding Hades' body tightly. In the original myth, Thanatos, the god of death, possessed such a chain, forged by the godsmith Hephaestus as a divine artifact. This feeble death god used it to hook the souls of mortals. He is still busy in the mortal realm at present and has not returned to the underworld, nor had a chance to witness in a phantom world what true death looks like. But like many offspring of chaos, Thanatos' flawed wisdom could hardly compare to mortals. He once fell for a king's trick and was shackled by his own artifact, becoming the first deity to be imprisoned by humans. Of course, the fate of that king was clear. After all, mortals might defeat a deity temporarily, but if they lose once, the price is eternity. Now, however, the same authority, the same style of chains, and the creation of death had Hades firmly locked in midair. Clatter clatter. His frantic struggle set off the sound of clashing chains, but Hades' resistance was obviously ineffective. At this moment, there was no third person in the sky. Those underworld deities who had ascended with Hades were long gone, not knowing where they had fled. And now, as spring still reigned in the mortal world, even Persephone was with her mother, completely unaware of the happenings here. Therefore, suspended in isolation in the sky, Laine's expression could not help but turn somber. Once again extending his hand into the void, this time, Laine drew a stone sword. As he grasped the hilt, it seemed to trigger a certain rule, and flames of gold erupted abruptly around him, failing to harm him in the slightest, but rather adding a golden cloak rustling in the underworld sky. This was the great solar incineration, a curse capable of scorching even common true gods, a remnant of the ancient sun god, split from consciousness and left behind in the world. It would burn any being that tried to wield it, making it unbearable for the weak and unnecessary for the strong. But at this moment, what Laine required was not its strength but the nature of its authority. If a system could not be destroyed from the outside, it should be dismantled from within. The best way to accomplish this was to insert into the intricate system something that was incompatible and indestructible. C 462-126. Death in the Netherworld under the blazing sun _2. Zing. The stone sword pierced through the air, penetrating Hades' chest, but it seemed as if the two were not on the same spatio-temporal plane. There was no sound of a blade cutting flesh. Behind the Lord of the Underworld, there was no sign of a sword point emerging. At this moment, only Laine knew that the sword had actually used Hades' godhood as a medium, following some connection deep into the origin sea, stabbing into the core symbolizing the underworld. In the illusory world devoid of physical law's protection, the sun penetrated the underworld so easily. For a moment, the entire world seemed to pause, and then came the endless light and heat radiating from the sky of the underworld. The dull sky was replaced by light, a great sun's phantom high in the sky, scorching the dark gray land. Wisps of mist rose, then vanished into nothingness in midair. Watching all this, Laine finally nodded, clearly seeing that his attack had truly taken effect. Hades was not a primordial god, and the land of the underworld was but a manifestation of the material world. If previously, the power of death had only damaged the surface of the underworld, now the stone sword had reached straight to the root. In just a few moments, tiny cracks had started appearing at the core of the underworld, and on Hades' body, wisps of vapor were being evaporated away. Attacking the exterior, only a little would reflect on the origin. But harming the origin would certainly be reflected in the symbolic outer world. Just like now, Hades suddenly found a wave of warmth rising from his mind, then spreading ceaselessly throughout his body. Whoosh! What have you done? The sound of clashing chains rang out again. Hades was struggling desperately. In this moment, his power began to disperse, to retreat, like a tough wire inserted into the gears of a precise machine, slowing down its operation, even causing its parts to conflict with each other. The entire cycle of the underworld was affected, showing a trend towards collapse. As the ruler of the underworld, Hades could clearly sense this. But bound in midair, he was powerless to act. Of course, as the foreign object embedded in the underworld, the stone sword carrying the sun was under even more terrible pressure, but this was meaningless. Because throughout the process, whether it was the sun, or the various authorities that constituted the underworld, they themselves were unharmed. It was only as a whole they were forced to separate. To the sun, whether it split or not, it remained the sun, but for the authorities that made up the underworld, together, they formed the self-sustaining underworld. Apart, they were but individual forces with different powers. Even an authority like the underworld, which had a clear regional nature, was far from the likes of destiny and lies. As the structure of the underworld was slowly dismantled day by day, its status diminished. Good. This is what I wanted. Ignoring the false deity's questioning, Laine maintained his hand in a grasping motion. He was wrestling with the illusory underworld, preventing the stone sword carrying the sun from being reflexively expelled from the origin by the cycle of the realm. Although destruction is easier than creation, the structure and cycle of the world have inertia. Even if this is just an illusory world, it couldn't completely disintegrate in a brief moment. 7 days. Making a silent judgment, Laine stood calmly in the sky of the underworld. Like dragging the nether beneath the earth, letting the sun shine directly upon the land of the dead. In 7 days, this place would completely disintegrate, and as the original ruler of the underworld, Hades would turn to dust under the sunlight. Reality, the divine palace of the underworld. The grand, lavish hall held Hades resting his elbow on the armrest, leaning on his throne for a moment. The newly appointed queen of the underworld stood not far away. In front of her was a cradle, inside which lay a baby with facial scars. Persephone gently rocked the cradle, singing an unknown tune. Waves of invisible power flowed with her voice, entering the withered body of the child. He was being transformed, from earthly to chthonic, from alive to dead, of course, and from dead to alive. He was favored by the powers of the underworld, nurtured personally by the queen of the underworld, so in some sense, this baby could also be considered the child of Hades and Persephone. Of course, since he was not born from her directly, he would naturally not become a true god. But a creature born through such a process, aside from immortality and authority, would probably not differ too much in mere strength. Time passed by the second, and at some point, the queen of the underworld also sat back in her place. The transformation of that baby was not an overnight matter. After all, he had once been blessed by the guardianship power of Hestia. Moreover, Persephone's control over the authorities of the underworld was not yet so effortless. Such delicate operations were taxing for her as well. Resting with closed eyes, Persephone was in good spirits. Life in the underworld was indeed very nice. If it could be a bit brighter, that would be all the better. Quote. Stop it. Hey. Suddenly, an angry shout shattered the calm of the divine palace, and the vast ashen grounds trembled for a moment. However, perhaps realizing something, as the voice's owner reigned in their power, everything returned to normal. Inside the divine palace of Hades, Hades abruptly awoke from his sleep. He gasped for air, his sharp gaze sweeping around, but all that met his eyes were the temple's pillars and the slender figure of the queen of the underworld. What's wrong with you? Did you have a nightmare? Didn't expect you to be frightened by a nightmare. Initially startled, she then spoke teasingly. But in Persephone's eyes, one could see a flicker of clear concern and vigilance. Gods seldom dream, especially not unpleasant dreams. After all, there has been no talk of a deity governing dreams in the world of today, so excluding the interference of external forces, the nightmare itself could very likely be an ominous portent from fate. Quote. Huh, it's nothing, probably just a warning. His heartbeat slowly relaxed, and Hades gradually returned to his usual demeanor. He waved his hand, signaling that there was no need for concern, but clearly, the queen of the underworld's curiosity had been piqued. What did you dream about? Were you thrown into the abyss, or was someone trying to strip you of your throne as the king of the underworld? She made two guesses, which she thought were the most likely scenarios. As for anything else, it likely wouldn't be enough to elicit such a violent reaction from Hades. Quote. No. Shaking his head, the king of the underworld denied it. Then what was it? Growing more curious, Persephone couldn't help but press further. Before her, after hesitating for a moment, Hades still revealed the truth. It was actually a ludicrous vision. I dreamed that the underworld was destroyed by someone. Seeing the queen's skeptical look, Hades gestured for her to hold her comments. He stood up from the throne, his gaze sweeping across the plains outside. The number of high-ranking wraiths was growing, and the underworld was expanding, everything progressing towards a better future. This is the best choice. Muttering quietly to himself, Hades smiled, then spoke to Persephone. The memories of the dream are vague. I am not clear on the cause and effect, I hardly remember the specifics, but in general, it seemed like an unfavorable ending. There were no wraiths, no strength, and I sat alone on the throne until one day, a being emanating light came down to the underworld. He stood before me, proclaiming he was going to destroy the entire world. And then what? Then he did it. Sitting back down in his chair, the king of the underworld gripped the armrest. He looked upward slightly, as though gazing at the nether moon, or perhaps at the mortal realm above the ground. He drew the sun down to the underworld, or perhaps dragged the underworld up to the mortal realm. Light and heat enveloped the world, and under the blazing sun, I was scorched for 7 days, without a drop of dew, without a breeze, in a place unknown to all, I and the underworld turned to ashes. This was the end of the dream. It's interesting, isn't it? Quote. What's interesting about that? A bit confused, Persephone asked. Well, what I mean is, what then after he destroyed the underworld? He laughed softly and then shook his head. Never mind, it has nothing to do with me, it's just a preposterous dream after all. The laws of this world are so mighty, a dream is ultimately just a dream. Compared to it, this underworld of mine is the truly real world. C 463 to 127. Eternal ownership in the Book of Ages. Backquote. Fantasy world, Olympus. The sun rose in the east and set in the west, illuminating the mountains across the earth as if unaware of another fierce sun rising underground. Zeus and the other gods still lingered at the peak, enjoying the muses, singing and dancing while waiting for that ignorant newcomer god. Deities care little about such brief moments in time, but not all were interested. Athena, for example, found an excuse to leave early and return to her palace atop the Mount of the Gods. Athena still had many doubts about this seemingly real yet fantastical world. She wasn't disinterested in learning more about those unfamiliar deities, but reality did not allow her to linger there. Because the goddess of wisdom, merged with another self, did not inherit the memories of the original body, every word she said might reveal her abnormality, or perhaps go unnoticed. However, given the uncertainty of how long this sudden change would last, she naturally opted for the most cautious approach. Walking on the steps paved with white jade, Athena quietly admired the new sights of Olympus. Perhaps because time had moved on, or maybe because Hephaestus's skills truly surpassed those of the Cyclops. Either way, the divine palaces rising along the seemingly endless ridges of the Mount of the Gods appeared even more majestic. They even boasted styles that were more distinctive, not typical of gods but as if the deities had been influenced by mortals. For those who lived there all along, they felt nothing unusual, but Athena perceived it very clearly. Gods and humans influence each other, even if they themselves are unaware. Pondering silently, the goddess continued forward. Her destination was her archive. The layout of her own palace was unknown to her, but Athena believed she would have such a place. And as expected, guided by the sense of divine power, she found her palace easily. Led by a somewhat puzzled maid, she quickly found the personal study amidst a complex network of corridors. Step. creak. Is this the place? A sky blue dress hid the maiden goddess's figure, with a light purple sash casually tied around her slender waist. Athena pushed open the door and began to survey the room's interior. A circular, vast archive, large rings surrounding smaller ones with shelves crammed with books on every level. It was Athena's first time seeing so many artifacts filled with knowledge, and a smile unwittingly graced her lips. Whether this world was real or illusory, one thing's value remained unchanged: knowledge. And this place was likely where the most knowledge in the world could be found. Even the collection of the Divine King could hardly compare to it, if Zeus were really interested in it. Yes, Your Highness, this is your study. Bowing respectfully, the nymph standing beside replied softly. She was somewhat puzzled. After all, this was the goddess's own palace's archive. But divine matters hardly allow for doubt. Regardless of why she was asked to lead the way, she raised no objections. Among the Olympian gods, Athena was indeed one of the more pleasant ones, but in any case, the other was a deity. Very well. Nodding her head, Athena returned to the present. She glanced slightly at the maid, who looked at the ground, then her finger moved slightly. With a thump, the nymph collapsed to the floor. In the next moment, an invisible force lifted her and placed her on a small bed inside the archive that the goddess had prepared. She would likely sleep for quite a long duration, until Athena fully grasped the situation. With her own ignorance about the situation, the goddess did not wish to create any more accidents. Now, let's see how the history of this world differs from what I know. Exhaling a breath, Athena stepped forward. Her skirt trailed over the floor that could mirror one's image, and she started to scrutinize the categorically sorted books. Some of them dealt with skills, some were biographies glorifying deities, and others were histories of kingdoms. However, after looking around, Athena couldn't find any documents that chronicled the entire world's history. She was initially surprised, then had a moment of realization. She nearly forgot one thing. Books are written by beings with wisdom. Humans need to record history to pass it on to future generations, but deities are immortal beings. They don't need to record their past in books since their own memories serve as the book of ages. Thus, deities don't record the entire history, and mortals lack the divine power and lifespan to write histories spanning across the ages. So, do I need to summarize it myself? Frowning briefly but then relaxing, Athena looked at the books recounting gods and humans. Their authors were either followers of the gods or scholars from human kingdoms, and the content inevitably contained some subjective judgment. But if she read enough, comprehended enough, Athena could piece together the true complete picture of history like assembling a puzzle, and comprehend the events that had occurred in this world's past. It promised to be no small task, but a monumental and complex endeavor. After all, to identify the single truth among various contradictory statements required not only wisdom but also ample time and experience. C 464 to 127. Eternal ownership in the Book of Ages, _2. Fortunately, Athena was not without aid. She had other means to accelerate the process. Thus the goddess in the form of a young girl took a scroll of ancient appearance from her waist, the divine artifact that was supposed to take her through her memories, yet now had brought her to another world. This was the only thing the goddess had brought with her. Aside from this, whether it was the clothes on her body or the spear of victory and shield of Aegis, those were what another, herself, naturally possessed. Through centuries of continuous use, Athena had gradually come to understand the might of this scroll. It could do more than read memories. In fact, the function relating to memories was but a trivial accessory. Its true ability lay in the manipulation of existence, the utilization of constants, and it was also the gateway to history. Memory is a summary and trace of the past, a life's cognition of bygone days. Thus the exploration of memory was included in the functions of this divine artifact. Now, with its power, Athena could easily collect all the literature in the archive and from there, reconstruct the most authentic scene of history. This was going to be much simpler. A divine artifact related to history could naturally and easily discern the true from the false. Standing inside the palace, the goddess slowly untied the strap of the scroll. As the strap fell to the ground, the divine artifact began to emit a faint light. But Athena did not rush to use it. She only stared at this naturally formed creation for a good while and then, at a certain moment, spoke softly. It's been a long time since our last meeting. I didn't expect to see you again here. It's a bit rude of me, but last time I didn't get the chance to ask, how should I address you? The world's transition originated from the reading of memories, and all of it was manipulated by this divine artifact. If this could still be considered accidental, then the apparition seen earlier certainly confirmed that everything was inevitable and related to that mysterious existence. Compared to understanding the history of this world, Athena actually wanted to know more about how to leave this place. And the most crucial of all was naturally to communicate with the person who had caused all this. Moreover, the other party had indeed given a sign. With this thought, Athena's expression grew even more resolute. Quote. As her words fell, there was no reaction at first. But after a short while, the scroll, symbolically held in the goddess's hands, began to tremble softly. Athena let go of the scroll, and then before her, it slowly opened. On its originally blank title page, a streak of ink manifested. This is unexpected. I had not thought your memory would turn out like this before today. However, I will put an end to all this. As for my name, there was a pause, as if the existence behind it was pondering how to refer to itself. After a moment, the ink continued, and a line of small print appeared above it. Compared to many creatures in this world, I was indeed born different. So if you need a name to call me by, then call me Yahweh. The writing appeared and then vanished, as if nothing had ever happened. But when the author of the ink acknowledged this name, it was not just the goddess who remembered it, but the world itself had it etched into its heart. The name of the Lord of the Spirit realm itself possessed some unfathomable quality, yet the effect of this appellation was diminished. This was true for both the gods and the world. Note: Yahweh is the romanization of the Hebrew pronunciation. Inside the archive, everything was as usual. The candlelight flickered slightly, casting its glow upon Athena's fair cheeks. The uncertain light seemed to reflect her thoughts, which were equally elusive. Yahweh. Athena silently mouthed the title, momentarily at a loss for words. Using a name that sounded like an adjective was not a unique practice, quite the contrary, it was very much in line with the features of the current era. Just like one of Athena's other names, Tritogenia, which meant the third child born, following Apollo and Artemis. Of course, in this altered world, the birth order had changed, so only in this illusory world had Athena ever heard someone addressing her in this way. In addition, another name often used by Zeus to disguise himself before mortal princesses or queens, Clonides, was a direct expression of son of Cronus. So it must be said that it was quite remarkable how the divine king was able to use such a pseudonym without ever being found out, whether it was because Zeus himself had cast some influence, or the queens and princesses of the chaos world weren't that perceptive. Experience more content on Empire. Either way, it was a reasonable method of naming that was widely propagated among the gods. However, that being said, not every word that served as an adjective could be used carelessly. The names of gods were bestowed by the world, and they often possessed special powers and a strong connection with other deities. If a self-assigned epithet were to create a connection as deep, it had to be equally true. In such cases, even the goddess of beauty couldn't call herself the most beautiful in the world, because this concept was tied to her godhood and the name Aphrodite. Without her divine role, whether she was truly the most beautiful would be debatable. Besides being true, these epithets also contained a hint of the distinguished status of their bearers. Whether Zeus or Athena liked it or not, a major source of their identity, apart from the authority bestowed by the world, came from their royal lineage. From this perspective, if this mysterious being claimed such a title, it meant he truly was self-existent and everlasting. The world granted the gods authority and power, yet he was inherently endowed with these. The world could revoke a deity's power, but his eternity remained intact. Athena didn't know if the primordial gods were like this, but even if they were, certainly not every one of them would possess such ability, as the example of Gaia had shown. And from the latter perspective, such a transcendent entity naturally didn't need anyone else to affirm his nobility, for he himself was the origin of everything. My apologies, sir. With a faint smile, Athena offered a slight bow without a sound. Her heart was somewhat shaken, but she was more cautious than anything. No one extends goodwill to a stranger for no reason. If they did, there must be some purpose. Don't worry about it. What comes naturally doesn't prove anything. Let's talk about you instead. The ink marks emerged and disappeared, noticeably faster than before. Athena felt a stir in her heart. Perhaps the person behind the script was not idle, engrossed in some task, and now finally had a moment to spare. This is a false world, yet it contains a true destiny relative to itself. Now, all of that has been swept into a pile of old papers, never to be realized again. So, about leaving this place. Is there anything in particular you would like me to do? Still smiling lightly, the bright-eyed goddess inquired casually. Leaving here isn't hard. What's important is what lies here. I've been contemplating this matter too, and your current actions have given me an idea. This world is false, but its original trajectory was true, indicating that its existence is a piece of history that should have been realized, acknowledged by chaos itself, just like the path it has taken up until now as the destined fate, acknowledged by chaos. The writing paused again, then continued to appear. This time, however, the strokes of the ink seemed to carry a certain inexplicable significance. I will destroy this world, Athena, and soon. The mount of the gods will crumble, the world will return to nothingness. And what you need to do is use this divine artifact as a medium, using this segment of non-existent history to bring about the birth of the annals of time. C 465 to 128, Black Rain. At Mount Olympus, within Athena's circular archive. The previous brief exchange had already concluded, and the palace once again fell into silence, with only the occasional sound of wax droplets falling. Ancient books floated in midair, enveloped by halos barely visible to the naked eye above the shelves, as information exchanged, as if something was being drawn out and pieced together. Once the will of its true master had departed, the divine artifact returned to Athena's control. At this moment, under her manipulation, the content recorded in the archives was extracted, and under the power of authority, filtered and assembled. No matter what she intended to do later, it did not affect Athena's eagerness to first understand the past of this world. Moreover, after the previous conversation, the goddess's appreciation for these documents increased by more than one level. After understanding what she was about to do, Athena finally became aware of her current environment. This was a false world, but it carried a complete and world-recognized destiny that became real because her memory of the divine king's secret involved some terrifying power. Thus, everything here could be trusted, yet not fully trusted. Of course, in this matter, Athena believed she still had the capacity to judge, and this was also one of the benefits she could gain from this illusory journey. The information she acquired here was a rehearsal for the future, allowing Athena to make more correct choices in the future or avoid many troubles that could be evaded. Like Hermes, Hebe, the Golden Apple, and Hephaestus. Your adventure continues at Empire. How annoying. With a bit of examining, as the divine artifact organized, the past of this world gradually unveiled itself to Athena. Naturally, her primary focus was on matters related to deities. After all, in the Third Era, even though suppression had descended upon the present world, until now, it was ultimately the gods who decided the course of this world. Therefore, Athena would certainly pay extra attention to this, especially those gods not heard of in reality. First was that young deity she had previously encountered, then the daughter of Hera not yet born in reality, the goddess of youth, Hebe, and Hera's only son, the smithing god Hephaestus. Initially, Athena's mood was quite good, but what surprised her was that as she read on, she actually found records of herself. Although the documents were vague, merely writing, after the smithing god was betrayed by his wife, he sought love from the goddess of wisdom who came to have weapons forged, but failed, and his essence fell upon the earth, birthing Erichthonius. Just thinking about it, Athena knew the process could not be simple. Publicly spilling his essence upon the earth, associated with another record in the documents, about the smithing god trapping his adulterous wife and her lover under a golden net and then summoning the other gods to watch. He must have been born in reality by now. Better keep my distance from him in the future. Quietly making up her mind, Athena felt it would be better to stay far away from this god with the peculiar hobbies. Should he insist on approaching, her divine artifact was no joke either. However, this increased the historical content's value in her eyes once more. Like the smithing god's behavior, while not greatly harmful, carried extreme indignity. Athena felt that if such a scene were also played out in reality, she could be disgusted by it for at least 1,000 years. The gold and crimson robe of dawn gradually faded, as the relentless sun hung high in the sky. While Athena was quietly perusing her archive, at the summit of Mount Olympus, the feast of the gods had just begun. Perhaps feeling that he had just threatened the gods and would soon display his force again, the divine king now appeared much more amiable. The muses, skilled in song, dance, and the arts, twirled gracefully in the hall, as the cupbearers of the gods poured out the fountain of youth into their golden goblets. At Hermes' invitation, Apollo even retrieved his lyre, playing an accompanying melody. For a moment, the atmosphere atop the mountain was very harmonious. Smiling, Zeus offered a drink to his queen of gods, only to be inevitably refused. The divine king was not surprised by this. After all, his previous command had indeed angered her. The cause of the current human wars was merely the extension of the discord between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, an escalation of the old grievances among the gods. Thus, Zeus simply drank the nectar himself, then quietly observed the joyous gods. The atmosphere was so harmonious, filled with joy and beauty, that the gods had long forgotten that wars were still raging in the mortal realm, and mortals were shedding blood in rivers for their will. But this was to be expected. For the eternal deities, the outcomes in the mortal realm were both significant and insignificant. Power, face-saving. To the gods, they were merely tools to make their own lives more pleasurable. The divine king would not dwell on this, yet for some reason, he always felt a vague sense of unreality. Everything in his memory was correct, and what he saw before him was no different from ordinary days. However, feeling his power that could upheave the earth and shake the world, Zeus couldn't shake a sense of emptiness in his heart. When did this feeling start? C 466 to 128. Black Rain _2. It seems, it's today. What's today? Father God, please drink up this cup. A voice suddenly arose from beside him. Zeus turned around, and saw it was Hermes, who had delivered the message earlier. The son he favored the most did not like to address him as Your Majesty, but the divine king felt quite good about it. If Zeus favored Apollo for being the most outstanding among his children, then his affection for Hermes was simply because he found the long-missed joy of being a father in him. Although the divine king himself was well aware that, as the cunning thief and the protector of merchants, no one knew which of Hermes's words were sincere, he didn't mind. Because Zeus was also very clear about why his other children were unwilling to be close to him. So, raising his cup once again, Zeus smiled and drained it in one gulp. Nothing, my child, I was just thinking of the message you brought not long ago. Since this era began, fewer and fewer true gods have been born into the world, and only among my offspring, as the divine king, are there exceptions. The birth of a new deity is also a rare event. It is indeed rare, but all this is your doing, Father God. Under your rule, the gods have been restrained, the immortals no longer ravage the earth as they did in the first two eras, and the cities of mortals have grown ever more prosperous. Placing his right hand over his heart, Hermes said with a smile. Perhaps this is the world's praise for your achievements, a recognition of your accomplishments perhaps. Ha 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 ha. You always have such a way with words. Zeus laughed heartily amidst his son's flattery, the slight sense of unreality he had felt before now cast aside by the divine king. Yes, just as Hermes had said, the world was no longer like the first two eras. The gods were submissive before the divine court, and he was the ruler of the sky and the earth, the king of all kings in the mortal realm. So tell me, why have you come? It can't be just to compliment me with a few words. The laughter stopped for a moment, and Zeus asked. He had already decided in his heart that as long as it was not too excessive a request, he would agree to Hermes's wish. However, contrary to expectation, the young deity did not seek any favor. Actually, it's still about your concerns. Father God, I had only conveyed half of the divine will to the mortal realm when an accident brought me back to the Mount of the Gods. Now, I must continue to fulfill my mission. Humans' perception of time differs from ours, Hermes said with a bow and a smile. If I delay a few more days, who knows what kind of accident might happen. Quote. Yes, you're right. After a moment's thought, Zeus had to admit that Hermes was correct. He waved his hand, signaling that the other could leave on his own accord. Then you should go, but it's a pity. If you're gone too long, you might miss the scene of the new god bowing in fealty to me. That won't happen, Father God. Your power is so immense, as noble as your character. I imagine that even far away in the mortal realm, I could witness your supreme majesty. May your reign be everlasting, King of the gods. Leaving behind his final words, Hermes's winged shoes fluttered slightly, and he turned into a streak of light, departing far from the Mount of the Gods. The gods only glanced at this before returning to their own concerns, for as the messenger of the divine king, he was always coming and going in a hurry. Thus Hermes departed on his way, but as he grew farther from the Mount of the Gods, a hint of relief suddenly flashed in the young deity's eyes. Who knows what will happen here in a few days? Better to hide out in the mortal realm for a while. After all, I'm not much of a warrior, and anyway, one more or one less of me won't make a difference. As the thought flitted through his mind, Hermes identified a direction and dashed towards it at breakneck speed. No one knew just how terrified Hermes had been when he summoned the new god's shadow and realized he could not control it. It was like a mortal witnessing the stuffed toy at the foot of their bed coming to life and smiling at them. In that instant, the young deity was drenched in cold sweat. Glancing back at Olympus, for some reason, the mighty mount of the gods seemed to have become a bit hazy. Shaking his head, Hermes stopped dwelling on it and once again hastened his pace. I'll stay away for 1 month. No, a full year. By then, whatever it is should have ended, he thought to himself as he gritted his teeth. Soon, all that was left was a fleeting streak of his light across the sky. ... As the final minor incident concluded, atop Mount Olympus, the gods remained oblivious to everything. The sun rose and set, and swiftly, 7 days passed by. Nothing had changed, and no one cared about these brief days. Until today, while the gods were merrily feasting, a violent tremor suddenly emanated from deep beneath the earth. Mountains quivered, oceans churned, and goblets from the feast spilled onto the ground. The gods looked puzzledly toward the world beyond the mountain, then their gazes converged on the divine king seated at the head. The violent noise seemed to come from the underworld, and Hades indeed had not come to Mount Olympus. This stirred their curiosity, as no one knew what the typically obedient and weak Hades was up to. Yet when they looked up, the gods saw even Zeus with a look of astonishment on his face. Your Majesty, what has happened? Asked one deity, and Zeus, after observing for a moment, spoke with some uncertainty. That is the law of the underworld, invading the surface. What? Someone exclaimed in alarm, only to be met with skepticism from others. Your Majesty, that seems improbable. Even if Hades is the lord of the underworld, he can't possibly do that. Indeed, just as Zeus could not let the laws of the living realm invade the abyss, theoretically Hades could not do something akin to self-destruction. However, the divine king, after observing again for a moment, nodded affirmatively. I'm not entirely sure myself, but it is so. The origins of the underworld seem to be rebelling, flowing in every direction. If this continues, Zeus had been explaining, but in the next instant, he stopped speaking, because he no longer needed to say more. In silence, the sky darkened. Black rain drifted down, from east to west, from south to north, over oceans and continents, and even between the stars. Endless waters flowed from high places, signifying the collision of laws. The rain carried the power of the underworld, altering the environment of the living world. Or rather, when the essence of death infused the realm of the living, such changes were inevitable. The gods did not know that this signified the collapse of the underworld. As its structure crumbled, the laws that formed it did not vanish. They simply attempted to merge into the nearby mortal realm, and the black rain was an external manifestation of this. But what truly silenced Zeus was not this, but the news that came with the black rain from the primal sea. Hades had died, along with his final warning. It seems like find adventures at Empire. After listening for a while, Zeus, who had stood up from his throne unintentionally, finally heard that voice. Despair, silence, release, and the final admonition from his own brother. It's the outsider, destruction. He has already arrived. C 467 to 129, having and not having. What has happened? Hermes, go to the underworld and see for yourself. Tell me what's going on there. Outside the Mount of the Gods, moments before it had been bright, but now it was enveloped in dullness. The color tone of the entire world darkened for a time, and standing before the throne, Zeus's divine power dispelled the chill in the air but failed to dispel the unease at the bottom of his heart. Hades was dead, and even now, the divine king found it hard to believe, even preferring the idea of some kind of misjudgment. After all, since the beginning of creation, he had never heard of a deity dying. So Zeus called upon his messenger. He wanted him to personally go to the underworld and see for himself. After all, when it came to speed, Hermes might not be the fastest of the gods, but he was still the principal god worshipped by travelers. His unique authority allowed him to traverse easily between the two realms, swiftly moving between the earth and the underworld. That's also why the divine king had chosen him as his messenger. However, after a long while, there was no response to Zeus's call within the temple. So the divine king looked around and finally set his gaze on Helios. Quote, Your Majesty, Hermes has not returned since he left 7 days ago. Helios responded upon seeing Zeus's gaze turn to him. Quote, Yes, that's right, he went at my command. After a moment of silence, Zeus remembered this matter. He had thought that Hermes had already returned, but clearly he had not. Although several days had passed, Hermes was still in the mortal realm. Perhaps after completing the task he was given, he went off to other places to wander, which was a common occurrence for him. It wouldn't have been a serious issue, but now, obviously, Zeus could no longer afford to wait for him. Sigh. Exhaling, the uncertainty in the divine king's heart dispersed. He admitted that he had been a little afraid just now, even though he did not yet know what his enemy was. While gods not dying was an iron rule since the dawn of creation, the movements from the sea of origin had never been false. If two absolutes were in conflict, clearly one had been violated, and that was exactly what he was worried about. So Zeus's first instinct was to have someone probe the situation, which had always been his habit. But after calming down, he abandoned that idea. If Hades's death turned out to be false, then there was nothing to fear. But if it was true, then, my fellow deities, let's all go and see for ourselves now. The divine king said indifferently. The next moment, with a violent roaring sound, a golden light flew from a palace on Mount Olympus directly into Zeus's hand. It was his thunder. He had not used it for many years because, since Typhon, there had been few in the world worthy of his full effort. Holding the divine artifact that had accompanied him through many battles, Zeus's mood surprisingly calmed down. If Hades was truly dead, then whatever caused all this, as long as it had consciousness, it could not possibly coexist with the gods. Since confrontation was inevitable, what purpose was there in delaying? The 3 generations of divine kings from chaos might have had their differences, but at least in one aspect they were similar. At least from the beginning to the end, when there was no way to avoid it, they all dared to swing their swords at powerful enemies. So Zeus stepped out of the palace and stood at the summit of the Mount of the Gods. He looked down upon the earth. First were the layers of gray clouds, lining up in succession from bottom to top, as if separating the celestial realm from the mortal realm. Looking through these rain-drenched clouds, the rumbling of the earth continued. With a flick of his right hand, the silver serpent shimmering on the thunder plunged from the sky like a chain, sinking deeply into the earth's poles. Come then, let me see what you truly are. Directly entering the underworld that was naturally impossible. Courage was not recklessness, so holding the other end of the chain, Zeus pulled hard. At first, there was no change, and the earth's rumbling was masked by the original tremors. However, quickly, Olympus sank slightly and the vast layers of ground were lifted by the divine king, heading towards the sky. If he did not want to go underground, then he would just lift up the lid. That was Zeus's thinking. Thus, as the land rose under his immense strength, all living beings wailed in despair. But no one could stop him. Even the gods behind Zeus were momentarily shocked by such a terrifying power and forgot the lives dwelling in the mortal realm. Until the next moment, a dazzling light suddenly emerged from underground, causing the earth to split left and right. The 7th day. In just a few days, within the dark and deep underworld, the landscape had completely changed. The shadow of the great sun hung high in the sky, even becoming more solid. Emitting increasingly strong light and heat, it seemed to purify the gray earth to reveal a dark hue. The underworld appeared to have lost some of its original properties. It was gradually becoming more like an ordinary earth. This seemed to be a good thing, if one ignored its other change. Now, standing in the sky and looking down, the vast underworld had shrunk to less than 100 miles in size, and at the very edges, it was continuously crumbling and eroding. The once expansive space was now empty, with only the endless void sustaining the world's existence there. The void had no size, and in fact, relative to the material within the world, it could not even be said to exist. If the world beyond was non-existence, and within was existence, then the void that carried the world was non-existence, within existence, existence, within non-existence. C 468 to 129, presence and absence _2. Here, there is no material, which is also what the world looked like at its inception. And now, standing in the void, about to destroy a world by his own hands, Laine had gained a deeper understanding of the creation of the universe. He did not know why the world was born, or how the first concept had emerged from absolute nothingness, just as humans in later generations did not understand how the heavens and the universe had appeared at the beginning. They could only make every effort to guess the initial state of all things, but in the end, they could not explain how this beginning came to be. It was like the physical laws of the world, which are objectively existing things. If there had to be a reason, then it was, everything was naturally so. Therefore, if one really had to name this original driving force, Then Laine thought, the way, might be more suitable to describe it. And the first one, that, the way, gave birth to was the void that carries the world. It was something, with respect to absolute nothingness, but it was non-existent to all things within the world. It was on its foundation that one gave birth to two, and together, matter and spirituality were born, in both opposition and unity, and from their intersection, all things began. Now, the collapse of the world was also following such a process. As the scope of the underworld became smaller and more matter disintegrated, Laine could feel that its part of spirituality was also dissipating. When everything ended, this place would return to the environment it was in at the beginning of creation, empty except for the void. In that case, I came to this world at the latest time, probably even before the two were born. Making a silent judgment, although Laine did not know what use it was, it did not prevent him from keeping it in mind. He had always been attentive to the years when he had been without consciousness at first. Crack. With a change in expression, Laine slightly lifted his head. Following the sound, it turned out that just a short distance below him, a tiny crack had appeared on the black chains that locked an invisible mass. The divine body of Hades had long since crumbled, completely incinerated and destroyed under the blaze of the sun. But the chains of death could lock not just tangible existence, so Hades still had no chance of escaping. As for the chains that were now breaking apart, it was not because they could not hold him anymore. On the contrary, this signified his end. The black chains of death would only bind the living. When Hades irrevocably entered his end, the chains that had lost their purpose naturally also lost their value to exist. When the chains completely disintegrated, it would be the moment Hades died. However, at that moment, Laine unexpectedly discovered that the consciousness of Hades appeared to still be very lucid. Although he could no longer make out a form, he could be sure that the other was looking at him, even speaking something to him. The task at hand was completed, and the arrangements with Athena were all made. So when this place ended, Laine planned to cleanly finish this world. Therefore, after realizing this, he didn't mind listening to what the other was thinking. Compared to the Underworld, completely destroying this world would take even less time. As he had said before, the reason he waited these 7 days was basically to verify the process of world disintegration. Otherwise, without the world's restrictions on his power taking effect, Laine could very easily end it all. After all, the gap between these gods in the fantasy world and their real selves was as vast as the difference between a strand of power that composed this world and the complete chaos, their strength largely only existing in settings. The tricks Laine prepared were to deal with Hypnos, and were simply unnecessary for this world alone. Outsider. At the convergence of the black chains, a certain concept subtly stirred. It could not emit sound, but when Laine wanted to listen, he could still hear it. So he nodded his head, acknowledging this title. Yes, perhaps as a form of self-rescue, in these 7 days, Hades's will had an unprecedented close bond with the gradually disintegrating underworld, and it was for this reason that he saw many things that he should not have seen. The outsider he spoke of was one of them. Although Hades still could not realize his own false essence, he had still discerned that Laine did not belong to this world. You are going to destroy the entire world. Yes. Laine nodded again, his expression unchanged. A longer silence followed, and with it came the sounds of chains snapping one after another. The underworld below had shrunk to less than a square mile, which was practically non-existent for an entire realm. Just when Laine thought Hades was about to meet his end, he heard a third inquiry. Why do you wish to destroy us? Turning his head, Laine looked at the concept that was about to completely dissipate. He had considered whether to say something, but ultimately decided against it. This was merely a fantasy world. So in the end, he simply stated indifferently. If there must be a reason. I suppose, that's the reason. He has arrived. Boom. The last bits of residue vanished completely, and the tremors of the illusory primordial sea coupled with the final warning of Hades echoed between the worlds, but Laine paid no heed to these. The dissolution of the underworld confirmed his theory, although there were some unsatisfactory aspects. For example, in his perception, the destruction of the underworld didn't cause much impact on this world. For the ecosystems of the mortal realm, it might have been near total annihilation, but the world itself only momentarily weakened. Laine could even see that, Without further interference, the origin forces that invaded the human world could be expelled through the world's cycles over long eras, and then they would reassemble and form a new underworld in this void. Even though it was bound to be a lengthy era, it was something that would inevitably happen. The power of the underworld is, after all, part of this world. It would be damaged due to the collapse of certain structures, but as long as these materials persist, everything can be repaired. But this is already enough. After all, for that world, chaos is the enemy that even now, it is still fighting against. When external pressures are immense, even the smallest of internal injuries can be amplified a millionfold. With a flick of his sleeve, he gathered all that remained here. After completing the final cleanup, Laine slightly raised his head. Standing in the void, above the top of the concept, he could see the ground rising slowly. Someone was pulling it up, and that was the power of thunder. Laine identified it with ease. Perhaps it was a display of power, or maybe using the earth as a shield, or more likely not wanting to venture into the unknown peril. In any case, under Zeus's force, the ground truly was rising slowly. But now, he had no intention of wasting any more time. So without waiting, Laine extended his finger and drew lightly in the air. Great sounds signify silence, great images are formless. It was a noise that should have shaken heaven and earth, yet at this moment, it seemed so inconsequential. The next instant, the earth above the void of the underworld split in two, revealing the sky and the sun, as well as the divine king standing on Mount Olympus. Is it you? When Laine saw Zeus, the latter also saw him. And instantly, the divine king recognized him as the owner of the phantom from a few days ago. You are that outsider. What have you done to the underworld? A questioning roar boomed like thunder, yet Laine didn't respond. He looked towards Zeus, and he also gazed upon the primordial seas connected by the divine authority. They appeared so mighty, yet so hollow. It's over. His figure vanished on the spot like a bubble, and in the next moment, an indescribable colossal shadow loomed over the world. It reached out, grasping both the earth and the sky. A gentle squeeze, as though breaking an eggshell. As for Zeus's questioning, he didn't need to explain. After all, what did the destruction of this world have to do with them? C 469-130, The Collapse. In the boundless void, a gigantic hand reached down from beyond the heavens, turning everything into dust. That's how it should have been, but in reality, it clearly wouldn't be so direct. Because at the moment the fantasy world was on the brink of complete destruction, the force that had been maintaining the world's existence had no choice but to be withdrawn. It transformed into an impenetrable barrier, designed to combat the great enemy of this fractured world. Of course, a force can't be used in two places at once, so when the membrane made of creation energy collided with the gigantic hand, while it stopped itself from being instantly annihilated, the unsupported illusionary world inevitably moved toward its end. The powers of the gods were dissipating, the law that constituted all things was disintegrating, the only difference was, one was a bit faster, the other a bit slower. After all, the collapse of self, however minuscule, still required a process. Above the western seas, on a fragmented islet, Hermes awakened amidst excruciating pain. He opened his eyes and recalled the recent events, the instant that inexplicable hand from beyond seized hold, the true great divine power and the remnants of creation collided. In that moment, a terribly frightening surge swept across the world. All beings with intermediate divine power and below vanished in the blink of an eye, and mortals turned to dust. Although Hermes was not among them, he too suffered unimaginable damage. He briefly lost consciousness and only after a while did he finally awake. Struggling to stand up from the ruins, Hermes couldn't help but gasp in pain. Hiss. I thought I had run far enough. Now it seems, not nearly far enough. Every part of his body ached as if he had endured some cruel torture. Hermes, having never experienced such pain, grimaced. It was truly unbearable for a god. But that wasn't the most critical issue. As he regained his senses a bit, he truly realized the current situation. Hermes could distinctly feel that as the unseen titanic hand from beyond continued to retract its strength, a sense of emptiness and withdrawal from the origin rose in his heart. Others may not know what this was, perhaps thinking it was the world extracting the deities' powers to fight the external threat. But at this moment, Hermes perceived a deeper secret. Is this world fake? Hey, this is truly beyond my expectations. Finding amusement amidst suffering, Hermes chuckled. It must be said that, among the native gods of this false world, he was one of the only three deities who had perceived this distinction between truth and illusion. The first was Hades, who sensed it due to his deep connection with the origin of the underworld before death. The second was Zeus, who could feel everything simply because of his position as divine king, and Hermes was the third. The reason he could perceive it was entirely accidental. He was originally the child of the sky-bearing titan Atlas, and the son of the storm goddess Moya and Zeus. In the intended trajectory, he possessed exceptional wisdom even as an infant, with many attributes known innately to titan deities, eventually ascending to the position of one of Olympus's 12 principal gods. But, unfortunately, reality differed from this fantasy world, and a turning point occurred in Atlas's fate. The birth of Hermes was consequently influenced, and amid the impending destruction of the world, this consequence allowed him to have a subtle intuition of reality. More coincidentally, the roles of commerce within Hermes's godhood were later additions. What truly belonged to him by nature had some relation to theft and travel. Cough cough, ruler of the thousand thunders, my revered father god, even now, you remain so mighty. Continue your adventure at Empire. After a light cough, Hermes looked in the direction where the land once lay. There, continents were divided, enormous spatial rifts devoured all like gaping maws. The only undamaged place was where Mount of the Gods, Olympus, was situated. That sky-bearing pillar, the home of the gods, an immense column of thunder that pierced through heaven and earth, shaking the heavens, was the embodiment of the divine king's unmatched power. But looking at this scene, Hermes felt a bit like laughing. Everything in the world suffers in comparison. Next to the colossal hand that enveloped the world, the thunder column, grandiose as it was, seemed less impactful. Instead, it was like an ant in the palm of the gigantic hand, provoking an existence it could never hope to oppose. Ha! Never mind that, it's better to leave now. What happens to my dear father god is his business, but if I wait any longer, I might not be able to leave at all. The greatest adventure of this world, a legendary journey, crossing between fantasy and reality. I just don't know what will be waiting for me on the other side. Are there any pretty girls? Despite his light-hearted words, gradually, the tension and fear in Hermes's heart were temporarily suppressed. He took one last look at this world, akin to the apocalypse, this world he had lived in for so long, which was in fact not real. Then, in the next moment, Hermes did not hesitate to muster his strength, igniting everything he possessed. Rather than waiting for the world to siphon them away to confront the destructor, he decided it would be better to make use of them. So in the next instant, from solid to ethereal, from stillness to extreme speed, Hermes's form swiftly turned into a dim streak of light, slicing through the sky in a flash. C 470 to 130, the collapse _2. In just a few flashes, unnoticed by any being, Hermes reached the end of the heavens, the place where the world collided with a giant hand. Terrifying fluctuations emanated from there, threatening to tear apart his consciousness, and at this crucial moment, Hermes forced himself to be spirited, expending his last bit of strength to use his authority. Thus, a crack opened before him, and through it came familiar yet strange energies. Hermes's plan had succeeded, but at the same time, an immense sense of fear arose in the heart of the young deity. Intuition told him that perhaps by passing through the crack, he really could reach where he wanted to go, but this very act was, in fact, not permitted by the world. The real world Hermes had not yet been born, but would be born eventually. So, if he went there, preempting the existence of the other, he would definitely have to pay a price. No one knew what that price would be. It could be the stripping of godhood, it could be a curse, or it could even be the loss of the immortal essence of a deity. After all, he was not an immortal to begin with, and things from a false world would not be effective in reality. So, if the present world was not willing to re-grant Hermes with the essence of immortality, then it was very possible that he would no longer be eternal. As if I have a choice. Whether another me can be born in the real world in the future, what does it have to do with me? With a sneer, pausing only briefly, the stream of light surged forward once more. Not until he had completely entered the crack did Hermes finally breathe a sigh of relief. Regardless of what he had to pay, at least he had escaped. However, he also felt that his consciousness was blurring. The one who had burned everything was almost eternally asleep, and the godhood from the false world obviously couldn't provide him with real divine power. As for the laws of the present world, they didn't seem to be reacting too directly to him yet. It looks like I'm going to sleep for a very long time, until the world passes its sentence. Letting his consciousness drift, amidst his reflections, Hermes took one last glance at that fantasy world. Like a bubble about to burst, it was dazzling and shining, yet could only struggle helplessly before that inexplicable giant hand. What's that? Suddenly, something caught Hermes's attention. It was on the finger of the giant hand, where a ring, verdant and radiant, was worn. Tiny runes, like specks of dust, were etched onto it, as if interpreting some ultimate truths of the world, and watching this scene, although he didn't know what it was, Hermes deeply etched it into his heart. For something to be worn by such a terrifying being, it must also be one of the top treasures in the world. Moreover, in his current peculiar state, Hermes vaguely felt that it represented a kind of mystical knowledge highly compatible with him. When I wake up, if I can indeed wake up, I must study it. Quietly deciding, leaving a bit of hopeful expectation for the future, as Hermes's last bit of strength dissipated, like plunging into boundless darkness, his memory completely went silent. All returned to calm, and this escapee from the fantasy world thus entered a long slumber, waiting for the day of future awakening. Boom. Crack. Outside Mount Olympus, streaks of silver serpents fell from the mountain's peak, causing a great rumbling sound. The divine king's unmatched strength was unmistakable, a realm still beyond the reach of the other gods, yet it was almost visible to the naked eye that the power contained within the thunder was no longer as strong as it had been at the outset. With the divine artifact scroll in hand, Athena in her white dress strolled midway up the Mount of the Gods. In a scene like the end of the world, the goddess seemed no different from usual. Her eyes were still bright, only now there was no audience. When the giant hand pressed down from the sky, Athena knew that the time had come. She gradually felt her connection with reality being restored, and at the same time, the power not her own within this body was also being withdrawn. However, she did not feel regretful. After all, false things might serve as reference, but should never be relied upon. Boom. Another bolt of lightning exploded midair, opening up dark spatial rifts. This was a sign of the instability of space and time. The fundamental rules of the world were losing their support. Everything was becoming fragile and brittle. And watching this scene, after weighing the situation, Athena finally placed her hand on the divine artifact. The reason Laine hadn't personally taken this step was not only because he was still wearing down the last resistance of this world, but the most important point was that he couldn't do it. To this fantasy world, he was but an outsider. To this memory, he was an observer, and even to the destined course of chaos, he was a disruptor. So he might be able to destroy this world, but he could never use it. Only Athena was different. The goddess of wisdom was an extremely important being in the destined light. It was still fundamentally manifested from her memories here. Everything in the fantasy world was naturally drawn to her, and most crucially, she bore a dead fate upon her. Yes, if Erebus could see it, Laine could see it as well. Pallas Athena, the child of Métis who surpassed her father, the arrogant king of gods and men, once had the chance to end Zeus's reign and become the fourth sovereign of the gods, but now, he no longer had the chance to be born.